How are you doing? Wonderful to see you. Thanks for your help and thanks. John, how are you doing? Okay. Yes.
おはようございます。おはようございます。
おはようございます。来てくれてありがとうございます。
今日頑張って。
頑張り
すごいいつも盛況ですね。すごい、大変素晴らしい企画をいつもやっていただいて、
ありがとうございます。
いつもできる限り今日はUN
ちょっと質問あります。これと関係ないんですけど、スポーツの担当は誰になるんですか？オリンピック担当。
オリンピックをデサで？
デサで。
オリンピック担当、スポーツがでもしかしたらうちのソーシャルディベロップメントで来るかもしれないんですけど、でアストリッドが今ちょっと一応そのサポートしてて、
わかりました。OK, see. そうですね。It's okay. Because I'm going to Japan, we're going to be talking to Tokyo 2020.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yes. So we really need to loop into Desa, so I'll contact Astrid.
Maybe like you could talk to Desa itself, because I don't know if there's any like official decision.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
All right. We'll do it. Okay. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. I know that a lot of people are still making their way inside, but if you can make your way to a seat, as long as someone's name is not on the nameplate, you can take any seat in the house. We'd like to welcome you to do that. Before we begin, I'd like to make just a couple of housekeeping announcements. The first is, first of all, thank all of you who are here today for joining us. We're very happy to have you. Although not everyone has the opportunity to speak, all of your voices are important and all of your views are important to us. So even though if you are not a part of this program, we want to hear your views on social media. So whether you're on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever platform you're using, we have 3 hashtags we're using today. The main one, as you can see on all of the plates, the nameplates, is Autism Day 2018. And we also have 2 new hashtags, hashtag Empower Autistic Girls and hashtag Empower Autistic Women. So when you tweet, try to use hashtag Autism Day 2018 and the others, but of course it's up to you. So if you have a device, whether it's an iPhone or a Samsung or whatever you have, turn the volume down, but don't turn it off, because we want to hear from you and we want to spread the word out of this room. Number 2, we are live. We're live on the United Nations webtv.un.org. We're live on Facebook. Last year, we had over 100,000 people watch us on the first day. That includes live within the first 24 hours, which shows just how much people around the world want to hear conversations about autism that are based in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So welcome to those of you who are not in the room, but who are joining us via the webcast. And finally, so those of you in the back, wherever you're sitting in the room, if you can't hear me very well, around the room we have these earpieces, and you have a volume control. If you put the earpiece on your ear and turn up the volume, it will be much easier for you to hear. So if you're having any issues hearing, please use this earbud. All right, so it's my great pleasure to introduce our Undersecretary General for Global Communications, Alison Smale.
So thank you so much for that introduction, Jeff, and welcome to everybody, particularly to Ambassador Mahmoud Saikal who's Vice President of the General Assembly here, to Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues, and particularly to Dakota Fanning for coming here to show her support today. Welcome, everybody, to the United Nations on this special day. It's the 10th annual observance of World Autism Awareness Day. My name is Alison Smale. I'm Under-Secretary General for Global Communications here at the United Nations. And at the outset, I would like to thank the permanent missions co-sponsoring this morning's event. We're talking about the permanent missions of Argentina, Bangladesh, Bulgaria, Denmark, Israel, Italy, Kazakhstan, and Poland. Just from that diverse group, you can see what the United Nations does every day, brings together different groups, different nations from around the world. We greatly value the support that these countries have given for the cause that we are gathered here to mark today. We come together to renew our commitment to raising awareness of the rights of persons with autism to equal opportunity and full participation in society. In particular, our focus today is on the rights of women and girls with autism, who have all too often been neglected. It could not be a more timely topic, considering the groundswell for women's empowerment that we have seen in society at large over the past few months. With organized action and mass movements like Me Too, women have stepped forward at all levels to claim their inalienable rights. Women with autism deserve to enjoy the fruits of these efforts like all other women. We know that women and girls with autism are subject to more discrimination than most, and that this discrimination takes many different forms. They are denied equal access to education and employment, to healthcare services, justice, and equal recognition before the law. And they are far too often denied the freedom to make their own choices. To achieve the inclusive society to which we aspire, we must ensure that the fundamental rights enshrined in the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, adopted by member states at the UN in 2006, are known and respected, and are recognized as applying to everyone, including women and girls with autism. As we look ahead, we must focus on empowering women and girls to fully exercise their rights on an equal footing with others. That includes giving them the tools and support they need to succeed, and a direct role in policy and decision-making on matters that concern them. Today, as we celebrate World Autism Awareness Day, officially marked on the 2nd of April, let us stand up for the human rights of women and girls with autism. Our efforts are particularly relevant as we celebrate the 70th anniversary this year of the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a landmark document that recognizes the equal and inalienable rights each one of us has. Without further ado, it is now my honor to read a message from the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres. The Secretary General regrets not being able to join us in person, but he sends his best wishes. Here is what he had to say. On World Autism Awareness Day, we stand up for the rights of people with autism and speak out against discrimination. This year's observance highlights the importance of empowering women and girls with autism. They face multiple challenges, including barriers to accessing education and employment on an equal footing with others, denial of their reproductive rights, and the freedom to make their own choices, and a lack of involvement in policy making on matters that concern them. Our work for gender equality and women's empowerment must reach all the world's women and girls. And our efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals must uphold the 2030 Agenda's core promise to leave no one behind. On World Autism Awareness Day, let us reaffirm our commitment to promote the full participation of all people with autism and ensure they have the necessary support to be able to exercise their rights and individual freedoms. That concludes the Secretary General's message. It is now my honor to hand the floor to His Excellency Ambassador Mahmoud Saikal, Vice President of the General Assembly. Thank you, Ambassador.
Madam Under-Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to represent the President of the General Assembly here today, and I'm pleased to present the statement of His Excellency Miroslav Lajcak. I regret not being able to be with you today because of official travel commitments. Let me congratulate the Department for Public Information and all other partners who have joined together to organize this event. This year marks the 10th since the General Assembly declared April 2nd as World Autism Awareness Day. It is an opportune moment to take stock of our approach to autism, both the challenges and the progress made. I welcome your focus on empowering women and girls with autism. Let me give you two messages today. The first is that we need to fight stigma and promote inclusion. 1 in 160 children are on the autism spectrum. Stigma and discrimination often shut them out from enjoying their human rights and achieving their potential. Events like this help to give a voice to those who may otherwise be left behind. This is a time to raise awareness about the challenges people with autism face, but also to speak about their contributions and successes. The power of new media technologies enables us to tell positive stories far and wide, like of Eileen Parker, founder of Cozy Calm, which sells weighted blankets, or of Chris Tidmarsh, who runs his own successful commercial greenhouse business, Dr. Temple Grandin, and so many more. These stories not only break stigma, they provide hope to many, including parents who may falsely believe that an autism diagnosis can have no positive outcome. Second, we must do more to empower women and girls with disabilities. Data tells us that women and girls with disabilities number more than 700 million. They face multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. Limited access to education, healthcare, and participation in public and political life, heightened vulnerability to sexual abuse, violence and exploitation, and grave inequalities in employment opportunities. Last December, the General Assembly recognized these challenges. We adopted a resolution calling on states to do more to protect the rights of women and girls with disabilities, to empower them. But we must translate those words into action. Let us press for more early intervention. We know this has significant benefits for inclusion and empowerment, and it is also one of the most cost-effective methods. For instance, some companies offer job training programs to help train individuals with autism in the workplace. This is a best practice to replicate around the world. As we work to achieve the SDGs by 2030, persons with disabilities should receive focused attention to ensure their inclusion. We will not achieve the SDGs unless we do so. Indeed, when we light it up blue, we mean the SDGs too. This is a reminder that we must leave no one behind. World Autism Awareness Day is a platform to raise public awareness about autism. but beyond this, it should spur us into action. Let us raise our voices and improve our policies for every woman and girl affected by autism. Let us reject discrimination, stigma, and injustice. And instead, let us embrace empowerment, dignity, and humanity for all people affected by autism. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Ambassador Seikel, for that inspiring call to action. I will now hand the program over to my colleague, Mr. Jeff Brez. Could you take it from here?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you,
very
Undersecretary
much.
General Smell. Thank you, Ambassador Seikel. Thank you for joining us today. It's now my pleasure to invite the first panel. We'll have the keynote after the first panel because we'd like to set the stage for you. And they're going to take their seats up here, so if you can take your seat in the audience. So our first panel is ableism, sexism, racism, and how they intersect. We're talking about multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination. I'd like to invite the panelists to join us on the podium. I'll be your moderator. I did not introduce myself earlier. My name is Jeff Brez, and I'm Chief of NGO Relations, Advocacy, and Special Events here at the United Nations Department of Public Information. I also have the very good fortune of working with my team on World Autism Awareness Day every year. And it's a special day for us every year, as your presence attests to. So I'll join them. Yes, please take seats on the podium. Yes. So I'm sure they'll change the nameplates in good time. Thank you for your patience. We're actually going to begin this panel with an intervention from via video link from Lithuania. And let us just check if Professor Jonas Ruškas, a member of the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, is with us. Are you here, Professor Ruškas?
Yes, I'm with you.
Fantastic. We can hear you. So we'd like to launch this panel with a question to you. So again, it's a rather daunting phrase, right? We're aiming to bring to light issues of multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination that women and girls with disabilities and with autism face. And on this panel, we're talking specifically about ableism, sexism, and racism, and we'll talk about different aspects of discrimination later in the session. But what we'd like you to explain to us, Professor, is what is the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and how do we use that convention as a framework to unpack this phrase, multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination?
Yeah, thank you a lot, Mr. Brez. Good morning to everybody. I would like to start by recalling the adoption of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. That's fine? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Little more than 10 years ago, on 13 December 2006 in the United Nations, the Convention heralds a new epoch in the way persons with disabilities have to be treated worldwide. The Convention provides for all civil, political, social, economic, and cultural rights of every person with disability. Also included disability-specific rights such as accessibility, awareness raising, access to justice, and data and statistics. The Convention proclaims very clearly that denial of these fundamental rights leads to the exclusion and segregation of persons with disabilities and constitutes the disability-based discrimination. It is under obligation of the state parties to address the violations of these rights and to implement them in ensuring that all persons with disability enjoy their rights on equal basis with others without any discrimination. I want to emphasize the Convention pays a particular attention to women and girls with disabilities. The Convention explicitly recognizes that women and girls with disabilities are often at greater risk both within and outside the home also at risk of violence, abuse, neglect, maltreatment, or exploitation. Article 6 of the Convention on the Rights of Women and Girls with Disabilities calls the state parties to recognize that women and girls with disabilities are subject to multiple discrimination, and in this regard to take measures to ensure the full and equal enjoyment by them of all human rights and fundamental freedoms. Also to take all appropriate measures to ensure the full development, advancement, and empowerment of women with disabilities. The UN Committee, the CRPD, observing the very concerning situation of women and girls with disabilities worldwide, has issued a general comment number 3 on Article 6 of the Convention. Let me please quote it. There is a strong evidence that women and girls with disabilities face barriers in most areas of life. These barriers create situations of multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination against women and girls with disabilities, particularly with regard to equal access to education, access to economic opportunities, access to social interaction, access to justice and equal recognition before the law, the ability to participate politically, and the ability to exercise control over their own lives across a range of contexts. For example, with regard to healthcare, including sexual and reproductive health, and where and with whom they wish to live. The committee is concerned about the prevalence of multiple and intersecting discrimination against women with disabilities on the account of their gender, disability, and other factors that are not sufficiently addressed in legislation and policies, on violence against women and girls with disabilities, including sexual violence and abuse, forced sterilization, female genital mutilation, sexual economic exploitation, institutionalization, medical individual pathology model, the lack of participation of women with disabilities in decision-making processes, the lack of inclusion of gender perspective in disability policies, the lack of disability rights perspective in gender policies, the lack of specific measures to promote the education and employment of women with disabilities. And this is particularly relevant to women and girls with autism. Based on my experience as committee member, I can state that state parties fail to protect, mostly fail to protect and empower women and girls with disabilities. Women and girls with disabilities are invisible in gender equality agenda. They are not consulted about the design of programs and measures related to them. Laws and policies addressing women equally ignore disability, including this diversity of disabilities. The invisibility perpetuates the situation of multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination against women and girls with disabilities. To conclude for this part, multiple and intersecting discrimination of women with disabilities, and including autistic women and girls, it is a serious violation of their fundamental rights and have to be addressed by the state parties under the obligation of the Convention for the full and effective inclusion in society. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ruškus. I'd like to now introduce the panelists who are in the room with me. Directly to my right, or to your left if you're watching from the audience, we have Saima Wazed Hossein, who's the World Health Organization Goodwill Ambassador for Autism in the Southeast Asia region. Thank you for being with us. To her right, we have Morenika Giwa Onaiwu, an Autism and Race Committee Chair for the Autism Women's Network. And to the far right, or your far left, we have Amy Gravino, who is an autism consultant and college coach with Ascot Consulting. So we're going to begin with the first question to our World Health Organization Goodwill Ambassador. In your capacity as a Goodwill Ambassador, what are girls and women with autism in the Southeast Asia region in Bangladesh telling you about their lives?
Thank you so much. It is a real honor and a pleasure to be here. It's been a couple of years since I haven't been here, but every year since we've started celebrating World Autism Awareness Day, I've been a part of this events, and it's wonderful to see how well it has evolved. And I particularly like the topic of discussion focusing on women and girls and their vulnerability, because for too long, the autism conversation has related to the needs of boys, because we tended to see more boys on the spectrum. As far as your, which is not really as well supported in research, there are a lot of girls who go underdiagnosed, unrecognized rather, and whose needs are not met, and they tend in the end and later in their adolescent years to experience a lot of anxieties, depression, and other mental health conditions, and that becomes their primary diagnosis, wherein their actual needs were never met. Their challenges for recognizing social cues and being able to function better socially. As for Bangladesh and Southeast Asia, I would say the biggest challenge is very much related to how girls and women and their roles in society is perceived. We are, as a region, very traditional-minded. Predominant role for a young girl is certainly a role in the family. They play a very important role, and when the expectation is already that she would be the educator for the family, the one who teaches her children, and she herself is challenged with autism and cannot perform that role, it makes her particularly vulnerable. In addition to that, you also have the expectation of her own desires. When you sent me the question, actually, and you said, what are girls telling you? The fact is, they don't have that opportunity to really tell you what they want. And that is the biggest challenge here, that they're not given that role. Part of it is the autism condition itself that makes it difficult for them, but the other part is how they are raised. Girls are raised to listen. Girls are raised to sort of follow. Girls aren't raised to take a stand and speak up for themselves, to speak their need. Their destinies in many ways is that to be a wife and a mother and a caregiver. So you are, that's a very difficult question to answer, and it is something that we need to find out more. What are these girls? What do they want? What are their innate interests? What are their talents? Because if we don't find a role for them in society, particularly when they are already challenged with a very complex I hate to say disability, but complex challenges that autism naturally has, then it is going to cause a bigger social gap. It is going to increase their vulnerability. The other very big issue in our society, like I said, the role is to be married, to have children, to be a wife, is them to be able to exercise their sexual rights. In Bangladesh in particular, and most countries in Southeast Asia, they are not really taught about their reproductive health. They're not taught about their sexuality. They're not educated on what their rights are. So women typically are already vulnerable. So when you add another component where the innate understanding and their ability to access information is limited, you are increasing the vulnerability. You are increasing the risk for further sexual exploitation. It is, and for many girls, they're not able to speak when they are being assaulted, when they're being exploited, when they're being taken advantage of within the family. So that's another really rather big challenge that we face in the region. The one more thing I'd like to add is that, participation in the social cultural environment, learning to sing, learning to dance, all of those things are very much part of our culture in Bangladesh, and girls are always, have a natural propensity towards that and are taught that at a very young age. Girls on the spectrum then are also denied the opportunity to expand on these talents that they could have. So another door for them is closed when they're on the spectrum.
Thank you very much. We'll move to our next. We'll move to our next speaker, Ms. Giwa Onaiwu. You're the proud mother of 6 biological and adoptive children, and you describe your family as proud, multicultural, multinational, neurodiverse, and HIV-affected family of color. So how are the girls and women in your family and in your community experiencing their neurodiversity?
Greetings, everyone. It's a very interesting question that I toiled over a bit when I reviewed it. As someone who did not receive my own autism diagnosis until my 30s, there was a lot of there was lack of visibility, which has been mentioned earlier. There is a lot to share, and the time that I have allotted to me is insufficient to be able to address it. But I guess the most frank answer that I could provide is it depends on the day of the week. It depends on the circumstances. It depends on the setting, how we're experiencing our neurodiversity. Personally, as an individual who occupies a lot of roles, I'm a college professor, I'm a mother, I'm an autistic adult, I'm a woman of color, I am a published author, I am an international speaker, an advocate. I wear a lot of hats, so to speak. These are all important, and in my family, the diagnoses that we have, which range from autism to HIV to PTSD to intellectual disability, we mirror society in that we hail from both resource-enhanced and resource-limited settings, and we try to live openly, authentically, and unapologetically as individuals with disabilities who are proud of who we are, of our background. However, that's only one part of the scenario. When you look at the fact that we do live in a society, and you can have all of the self-acceptance that you can possess, you don't control the systematic factors that impact your lives. Audre Lorde stated once that there is no such thing as a single-issue struggle because we do not lead single-issue lives. And the topic of intersectionality, when you're looking at racism, ableism, when you're looking at misogyny, and all of these different factors, when you think about the term which was coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, intersectionality in general, it's talking about multiple different forms of oppression. It's not just talking about identities. And so when you are an individual who has multiple marginalizations, such as a woman, girl, or a non-binary individual who is autistic, you are already coming into society already marked, essentially. And then there are these other factors that are layered onto that are going to impact your life, and none of them are going to give you a break, essentially. There is a saying in the Black community, you have to work twice as hard to get half. And if you are autistic, and particularly an autistic woman or girl, you might have to work 4 times as hard to get a fourth of what others have. And so when you're thinking about scenarios such as the fact that disabled women in general, according to some statistics, are more than 40% likely to be to experience trauma or abuse, namely intimate partner violence. When you look at the rates of employment among autistic adults, and you look at the lack of resources for autistic adults, you find that women and girls may find themselves in a scenario where they have to deal with toxic relationships, where they have to deal with discrimination, where they have to decide what they're going to stomach just to survive. From wage discrimination to the school to prison pipeline to the misogyny that is very prevalent in society to the to all types of factors, all of these things that impact any person of color, any woman of color, is going to be even more exponentially pronounced if you are a woman and girl who is autistic, such as myself and my daughter. And so essentially one thing that I'd like to say is that we know the statistics. We've all heard them multiple times that African Americans are diagnosed often 1.5 to 2 years later than their white counterparts. Both, if you're looking at African American and Latino children, there's between 30 to 50% less likelihood of them being diagnosed effectively. And when you look at the fact that women are often, as mentioned earlier, underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed, you have a perfect storm for catastrophe. And so I would like to say that at this moment, as an autistic woman of color, I'm experiencing my neurodiversity by sharing my life, my stories, and my perspective. But in 5 minutes from now, or an hour from now, I can't tell you how myself or people from my community are going to be experiencing it. I can't tell you how at a police stop, do I need to be more fearful of the fact that I'm Black? Do I need to be more fearful of the fact that I'm female? Do I need to be more fearful of the fact that maybe I will not follow directions because of auditory processing delays, or that my body movements, if I'm flapping, might frighten the individual into thinking I'm assaulting them? There are so many things that go through one's head, and so many unspoken and unwritten rules that are imposed upon women and autistic girls and non-binary individuals already. So essentially, the first thing that we need is for you to perceive us, to see us. We are here, right among you. We have always been here. First, see us, recognize us. Secondly, listen to us, let us speak. And thirdly, let's begin to dismantle a lot of the policies that exist in society already that are making it difficult for individuals with multiple marginalizations, period. Because if others can thrive, we can thrive as well if given the proper supports and resources that we need, and if we are able to lead our cause. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that. Our final speaker on this panel is Amy Gravino. Ms. Gravino, you're a writer, you're an international speaker, and an autism advocate, and you've really quite bravely written about being bullied yourself as an adult. Can you tell us why do you think you've been a target of bullying in the workplace and other places, and how have you overcome those experiences?
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. This has been a journey. I spoke here 7 years ago with Saima on a panel, so I feel very privileged and blessed to be here. When I received this question, I knew my answer almost immediately, and it was kind of a sad thing to think about, because I was bullied all through school, through elementary, middle, and high school, and I understood it. I didn't like it. It hurt. It was very painful, but I understood it. People didn't like me, so they bullied me. When I became an adult, I encountered a new kind of bullying, which was from people who I loved and who I thought loved me, but actually didn't. I moved across the country after graduating from college and became involved with someone, a guy, which is probably not the best adjective, so I'll go with invertebrate, because that's closer to what he was. I wound up losing my virginity to him, and about 6 months later learned that he had had a girlfriend he forgot to tell me about and was sleeping with half the women in the city. And while these other girls would be calling up his girlfriend saying how great he was in bed and so on and so forth, I was the target. His girlfriend would call me, harass me, threaten to kill me if I didn't leave town, say all of these terrible things. And I knew somewhere inside of me that I've always had kind of the word target on my forehead. I love too much. I love very deeply. And I think that's part of being autistic, a part I'm grateful for, but a part that also gets me in trouble because I can't shut it off necessarily. At one point, he sent me an email that essentially said, "Your first time was the grossest thing I ever did. You were just a retarded whore," word I won't say. And I feel that language was very specifically used. I think that if I had not been autistic, I would not have been as much of a target as I became, because I fell in love with him. I was open and honest, and it really hurt to feel that my judgment had been so misguided that, I had thought that this guy felt for me what I did for him. And everyone, my parents, my friends 3,000 miles away, all knew something was not right. And I, of course, thought, no, how can they know? They're across the country. I'm here. They don't really know him. They were absolutely right. But I had to learn the hard way. And I again, as I say, I was the target. I was vulnerable. I was inexperienced. I had only had one boyfriend prior to this, and I, didn't know a lot about relationships, obviously, and I was just innately vulnerable. I think that I trusted him, obviously, very readily, and I was willing to do anything to make him happy. I think a lot of autistic people, especially autistic women, we find ourselves subverting our own needs and desires to please others. That's how we're socialized in society quite a lot, and especially in this instance at this time in my life where I didn't have a lot of self-confidence. I wasn't the person that I am now, and so I was looking for validation from him. I was looking for love. I guess the word desperate could be used, but really now when I look back, I'd rather apply the word desperate to him as someone who'd be willing to take someone's virginity under false pretenses and do what he did and kind of leave the memory of that night forever tainted for me. But the fact that all of this bile was thrown my way, that I just took it, I never really fought back. I kept picking up the phone every time it rang because I was hoping it was him saying he was choosing me over her. Again, I was in love, I was stupid. And the way, there are two, types of moving on I came to learn. Because the first type of moving on, because when all this happened, I found this all out on the phone or online. He never confronted me face to face. See, invertebrate. And so we never had a face-to-face conversation. So I kind of had to move on because he was ripped out of my life. But it took a good 7 or 8 years before I was able to fully move on, and which happened when I developed feelings for someone new, which I didn't think I'd be able to. But then it ended up not working out with that person, but I was still okay. And I thought, well, even if I ever have feelings for someone, if it doesn't work out, I won't be able to survive that. But I did. And there's no magic solution. There's no one thing that can heal a broken heart, except that I found a strength inside of me that I think a lot of autistic women have in us, that people underestimate, people don't realize we have, that enables us to put up with so much stuff from other people, from neurotypicals, from autistic men, I'm sorry to say. It comes from all directions. And that strength came out when I was tested and faced with this horrible situation. So that was, a clear instance of becoming a target, how it altered my life in some terrible ways and in some actually very positive ways. And he had the nerve to message me a few months later and say, "I'm sorry I ruined your life." And I just got angry for the first time in all of this. And I thought, how dare you give yourself that much credit? You haven't ruined my life. I'm still here. And I'm still here. So thank you.
Thank you very, very much. We're hearing about these terrible and insidious forms of discrimination. I think one of the most frightening words is invisible. And the first way to tackle invisible is by having very, very brave people and brave women speak up. And that's what we're seeing today. And that's the first part of our common battle. So thank you for that. We're going to wrap up this panel by getting to some, sort of concrete action, right? So given this general situation, what most needs to be done to empower girls and women? So we need to keep it very, very short. And before we go to our panelists here, we're going to go back to Professor Ruškas with a specific question relating to governments. So if you can do it in under 60 seconds, Professor, please. What are governments doing to improve policies and support for women and girls with autism? Governments.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Regulatively, there are very little specific policies and support measures for women and girls with autism across state parties of the Convention. In the light of the jurisprudence of the Convention, of the obligations of the state parties on the Convention, we, the committee, are insistently inviting the state parties to combat multiple discriminations through repealing discriminatory law that are out, and to outlaw gender and disability-based discrimination and intersectional forms. And also, state parties should adopt appropriate laws and policies and actions to ensure the rights of women with disabilities are included in all policies, especially in policies related to women in general, and as well in policies on disabilities. Yes, and the committee invited state parties to adopt affirmative actions measures for development, advancement, and empowerment of women with disabilities. What is really important, in consultations with organizations of women with disabilities. And finally, to promote the creation of organizations and networks of women with disabilities and the support of women with disabilities to take leadership roles in public decision-making bodies at all levels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ruškas, for being with us. We very much appreciate your insights and the information about the convention and what governments are doing. Ms. Hossein.
Same question? Well, actually, I'd like to, I'm very proud to say that Bangladesh has taken a very comprehensive role in this. We have a National Advisory Committee which composed of 14 ministries. I had the chair of the advisory committee, and what the 14 ministries pretty much involves all aspects of life, so involving education, employment, participation in cultural affairs, social rights, and certainly health, and many others. So what that has done is caused a major shift in how our government formed design policies and programs, rather than from just looking at ensuring rights, but empowering them, making sure that education opportunities are available, employment opportunities are available, and really programmatically this shift is what is very much needed, looking at a lifespan sort of approach. And I'd also like to mention that regionally, with the help of the World Health Organization Southeast Asia office, we also have a regional collaborative framework along the same principles, very multi-sectoral, partnering with both governmental and non-governmental sectors, and looking at holistically what a person on the spectrum would need. So not following any particular medical or social model, but a comprehensive evaluation and approach for policy and programming that involves the entire life.
Thank you so much. Ms. Giwa Onaiwu, you've already told us, first see us, recognize us, let us speak. What would you add to that in terms of one concrete thing you need to see?
I'll try my best to narrow it to one, but I do need to say that when we're thinking of women and autistic girls, I do want to mention that in the Autistic Women's Network, we look at gender in an inclusive manner in terms of transgender women as well being identified as women. And so in terms of invisibility, I want to mention that I think this is a great diverse panel, but I don't think that we fully represent the spectrum of women, but I think that this is a start. I'm hoping next year we'll build upon that. But I'd add that essentially we need to look at autism from the neurodiversity paradigm, which essentially is that it is another form of diversity of the human existence. And so policies, thank you. Thank you. So policies, procedures that that are progressive, that help individuals in general with regard to employment, healthcare, and so forth, will be those that also positively impact autistic women and girls. Portrayal in media and literature, we have a few books that I'll be giving to a few of our guests here about that depict our stories, and that's important as well. So continuing to listen, to see, and to grow.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gravino.
Same question?
Yes.
Okay. I'm a member of several organizations that are specifically geared toward girls and women. Yes, She Can, which does job training, and Felicity House, which is here in the city for women on the spectrum, which is represented here today. And a lot of times when I mention these to people, they say, well what about boys? And I was like, everything else is for boys. Yes. And it's an amazing thing that as soon as you mention something like this that is created just for us, other people wonder why it has to be. It's sort of like when people say, well, why isn't there a straight pride parade? Well, you don't need one. And it's this, when we create spaces for us, let those be our spaces. We need these environments to help foster connections among girls and women, to help raise our voices. I think we need to listen to those voices as well, that we're not necessarily segregating ourselves, but we're trying to find a place to be safe, because it can be hard to feel safe even in autistic spaces. I've left groups because I was getting hit on by guys or getting ignored or harassed, and it's very difficult. So I would say let our spaces be our spaces. Give us more spaces. Give us not just a seat at the table, but a chance to speak up and be heard. I think that's the most important thing, and recognize that what might seem like a fault, having big hearts, is actually a vital asset. So.
Well, thank you very much to our panelists. I invite you to take your seats back in the audience. And it's my pleasure now to introduce the next segment, which is our keynote speech. So I'll invite our speaker to come to the lectern here. Our keynote address will be by Ms. Julia Bascom, who's the Executive Director of the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. We're very thrilled and honored to have you with us. Please, Ms. Bascom.
I'm a little tall. I want to make sure this is going to catch. Everyone can hear me? Okay. Good morning. Thank you so much for having me here today. I want to start by acknowledging just the sheer number of self-advocate speakers that the UN has brought together today. I believe, it's been like 5 minutes since I looked at the program, so this could have changed, but I believe that every panel has at least one self-advocate speaker, and I think several are like 50-50. And that's the kind of thing that should be commonplace. That should be able to be sort of the baseline assumption that we have about autism events. But unfortunately, it's still very out of the ordinary, so I want to recognize the leadership the UN is showing, not only in bringing so many outstanding autistic women together here today, but in working so closely with us to set today's agenda. I also want to challenge everyone here to take one step further. In the autistic community, we have a tradition. It's called flap, not clap. If we can all just practice for a second, flapping instead of clapping, thank you. We find that that's a better way to celebrate a community that has disabilities that affect our sensory processing. So I want to challenge us all to try that today. This is also the American Sign Language sign for applause, so we have some nice cross-disability solidarity there. And more importantly, I want to recognize all of the other autistic women in this room. Hi, everyone. I think I know most of you, but not everyone. Can you believe we're here? It's really cool. So I'm supposed to give a general overview of the state of the world for autistic women and girls today. To be honest, I don't think I'm going to be saying anything that the women here today don't already know. The reality is that autistic women have always been here. We've always been everywhere. We're being noticed more now, which is new and nice, but our existence and our strength and our vibrancy and the complexities and trials and joys of our life have always gone on, regardless of who sees us. What I'm going to say now might be new to people who are just tuning in, but we know that autistic women have always had a lot to say about our lives and our communities and our world, and we've been saying it for a long time. So consider this the Cliff Notes version. As a society, we still see autism as a negative, sad, scary thing. But for autistic women, an autism diagnosis can actually be a tool for empowerment. It's an answer, it's an explanation, it's a way out of cycles of self-blame and guilt. It's a passport to an entire community. And if we're lucky, it's a connection to the understanding, supports, and services we need in order to truly thrive, sometimes for the first time in our life. But access to diagnosis, as you heard on the first panel, is still deeply inequitable. Autistic women and girls are diagnosed much less frequently than autistic boys, and we're often diagnosed later in life, or after we've gone through this sort of like roulette wheel of other labels. One of the most common ways for autistic women to get diagnosed is actually after we bring our own children in for assessment. The diagnostic criteria for autism are normed off of 4-year-old white boys and upper middle class families in the US, so anyone who doesn't fit in that box has an uphill climb. I'm most familiar with the US, so most of my examples are going to be US-centric, but we see some common patterns globally. We still talk about autism as an extreme male brain, as though autistic women and girls don't exist, as though autistic people aren't more likely to inhabit the whole breadth and complexity of the gender spectrum, as though trans autistic women and girls aren't a critical part of our community. We still see significant underdiagnosis in communities of color, and we still have yet to truthfully and honestly confront the role that racism has played in that. A diagnosis is still far too often dependent on access to certain resources and income, and the end result is that all across the globe, autistic women and girls are missed, overlooked, and ignored. So when we look at these kinds of persistent diagnostic disparities, it's hard for me to agree with theories which hold that women and girls are just less likely to be autistic. Maybe, But none of the studies meaningfully account for these kinds of systemic inequalities. And as an advocate for civil and human rights, I just can't unsee all the ways autistic women and girls are swept under the rug. Instead of resting easily on statistics which say that there's only one autistic woman for every 2 or 4 or 9 autistic men, we should be working relentlessly to close those gaps and make sure that everyone who needs a diagnosis is connected to equitable support. Then we can have a count again, I suppose, if we really need one. My concern really isn't about the data, it's about justice. Because as a society, all across the globe, we tell narrow stories about autism, and they hobble us. Ideas and stories have real-world consequences. The stories we tell about autism may have expanded slightly in recent years, but they're still incredibly restrictive. We tell stories that say that being autistic and being an adult or a woman are just incompatible. We tell stories that say that autism is irreconcilable with strength or competence, that autistic people lack empathy or emotions, that autistic people are burdens on our families and psychically harm those around us. And above all else, we tell stories that say that autistic people are voiceless and powerless. We tell stories that say over and over again that an autistic life is a frozen, post-apocalyptic hellscape. We tell stories that pit autism and happiness against each other. And all of those stories place enormous limits on the lives and futures of autistic women and girls. We have to spend our whole lives speaking up and speaking out and finding ways to cut through these overpowering, disempowering narratives and find our truth. The only way to change this is to listen to autistic people. Just listen to autistic women. Stop speaking over us. Stop trying to help. Stop insisting that we are the voiceless in need of a voice, and just listen. Just listen. Because we know what we need. We've got this. It shouldn't be surprising, but the needs and struggles of autistic women and girls are very similar to the needs and struggles of women and girls broadly. We need our voices to be heard and honored. We need access to education and employment. We need access to the tools that empower us to be a part of the world and in charge of our own destinies. We need equal pay, not some minimum wages, not segregated employment. We need real education, not 40 hours a week of behavioral modification, not compliance training, not forced normalization, but a real education. Thank you. And I want to spend a second on this because it's important. The goal of the most popular autism therapy in the US is to render autistic women, quote, indistinguishable from our peers. And there are those who want to export this model all over the world. I didn't wake up today dreaming of being just like everybody else. I woke up today and thought about how I was going to go flap my hands in the United Nations. My life, in many ways, looks different from that of other women and girls, but in the essentials, it is exactly the same. I deserve that same endless possibility. I deserve that same support. I deserve to be my own best champion. I deserve to be my own sun and my own moon and my own stars. And none of that depends on how well I can make eye contact, or how fluently I can speak, or how still I can sit. I was sitting on the floor back there earlier, actually. This is my birthright as a woman. Autism shapes what it might look like, but it doesn't change a single one of my rights. As an autistic woman, however, my rights are less likely to be taken seriously. As an autistic woman, I'm more likely to lack access to comprehensive sex education, to contraception, and reproductive health care. I'm less likely to be recognized legally as a person and a full citizen. I'm more likely to be subject to eugenic sterilization, even today. If I do have a child but need support to be a parent, that support might specifically not exist for me. In many places, that child can be taken away from me forever because of ideas that people have about my disability. The vast majority of autism research funding is spent on biomedical research, particularly research seeking to understand the cause and genetic underpinnings of autism. This research is often referred to as prevention. No price tag is too high to ensure that no other children are born like me. The genetics of autism are complicated, but we all know what happens next. We've seen this play out in the Down syndrome community. It does not escape my notice that women with Down syndrome are often missing entirely from that debate, and I fear that the same thing will happen to autistic women. Women with disabilities have some of the most relevant and most important voices in discussions about eugenics, reproductive rights, and women's rights. But where are we being heard? What do we have to do to be heard? Listen to us. Listen to us. Women with intellectual and developmental disabilities, including autistic women and girls, are subject to sexual assault at a rate of over 83%. It is impossible to talk about autistic womanhood without talking about violence. Autistic women have been talking about this for decades, but when we make these conversations public, people draw back because it's impossible to talk about the violence we experience without talking about how that violence is facilitated by the systems that are supposed to serve us. Lifetimes of behavioral conditioning and compliance training groom and victimize us. Inadequate service systems trap us in abusive marriages and family situations without escape, because who will take care of us if we leave? Domestic violence services often aren't ready for us and don't know how to help. And there are those who would try to turn this into a conversation about social skills, proposing that our disability itself is to blame. What a devastatingly cruel myth. We don't project some kind of aura that compels people to abuse us. We are subject to violence because we are devalued, and our abusers know this. And I say all of this not to bring us down, but to be clear about the road ahead. All of this is changeable. None of this is inevitable. Family life, education, service provision all present with hundreds of opportunities to change this narrative every day. We can teach autistic girls from the moment they are born that they are in charge of their bodies. We can teach autistic girls that their boundaries matter, that they are in charge of what happens to them, that their no means no, and that their feelings and experiences and preferences are important. We can ensure that autistic women and girls are not segregated and isolated, but are supported to live rich, full lives of boundless opportunity in the broader community. We can create service systems which enable all disabled women to live free of coercion, where we are in charge of who helps us and what help we receive and how. We can eliminate every barrier, every closed door, every narrow gate. We can create a world that values and supports and celebrates autistic women and girls. We know what we need to do. The mother of the disability rights movement, Judy Heumann, famously said that independence isn't about doing things on your own. It's about being in charge of how things are done. And as autistic women, we know that truth better than most. Most of us need support in order to get things done. Very few of us can live our lives on our own. That's okay. Working out how that support can be provided can be tricky, but our needs and our disabilities are never in conflict with our rights. Our rights as autistic women are the same rights as any other woman, even if we need help all the time, even if we can't speak verbally, even if, yes, then too. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities doesn't come with a qualifying test. These rights are for all of us. This future is for all of us. And this future is incredible. The things autistic women can do when we are supported and free are breathtaking. I have met women who have written books, women who have started companies, women who have invented new ways of seeing the world. I have met women who can't speak, but who type some of the most incisive commentary I've ever read, and I've met women who produce works of art that render me speechless. I have met women who are taking on the world, and I have met women who looked at their local communities and thought, I'm going to start here. Last month, I was at a dinner where an autistic journalist and the first Senate staffer with an intellectual disability haggled over where to place a piece of news coverage. None of this is dependent on the level of support we might need. We are changing what is possible, and we will bring everyone in our community along. The women here today are incredible, and there are so many more of us. We are everywhere, and we are making our own future. We aren't waiting on the rest of the world to catch up, but we would love it if you came along. Thank you for bringing us together here. Thank you for listening. Let's get to work.
Ladies and gentlemen, another round of applause, and thank you for Julia Bascom. We're going to move on to the next portion of our program, and we're going to have a little bit of a different setup. We're going to put some chairs in the front because one of the things that's changing in our world is that in addition to the issue and people with autism becoming less invisible, like the barriers they face, we're seeing more about them in sort of the mass media. We've seen documentaries in the past, and now we're seeing television shows and feature films, narrative feature films. And we have two wonderful feature films that we're going to be talking about and seeing a little piece of today. And the first one is called Please Stand By. And our moderator for this session is going to be Elaine Hall, who is the founder and creative director of the Miracle Project. And so I'd like to invite Elaine and all of the panelists to join us here in the front. And before I hand it over to Elaine, our moderator, I'm just going to let you know that we're going to see some short scenes from Please Stand By. And one is a film, scene from the film where Wendy, who's portrayed by Dakota Fanning, who is with us here today, is visited by her sister Audrey. Please take your seats here. Visited by her sister Audrey, portrayed by Alice Eve. And we will see these clips, and then Elaine will introduce her panel, and they will have a conversation about putting this film together. So please all take your seats. And once you're sitting, then we'll roll the clip or clips.
So I heard you got a job. Do you like it?
No, it sucks, but at least I get to make Cinnabons.
Huh. I brought you a picture of Ruby.
What can Ruby do now?
Well, she can say Mama and Dada. And Elmo. She loves Elmo.
Can I have this picture of Ruby?
Yeah, I brought it for you.
When can I meet Ruby?
Soon.
I'm her aunt.
So, Wendy, I came to visit today because there's something I need to tell you. Jack has finally found a new job. And
there's a Star Trek script writing contest.
Oh, okay, cool.
It's a contest where they're having people write their own Star Trek movie scripts, and I wrote a script.
Oh, wow.
Today is the last day to send it in, but I didn't want to send it until it was absolutely ready, so I double-checked and triple-checked and quadruple-checked, and it's ready to go to the post office now. So if we mail it in, it'll get there right on time. It's ready to go, so we can go to the post office, and then I can go home with you.
When did we talk about this?
After I win, I'll have $100,000, and you won't have to take care of me anymore, and you won't have to sell Mom's house.
But I don't want to take you out of here when you're doing so good. It's not that I don't want to, it's that it's not a good time. But don't you like it here?
No, I have to eat pizza on Thursdays even if I don't want to. I can't watch TV when I want to. I can't write when I want to. So I'm ready to go home with you now, Audrey.
Wendy, please don't do this now.
I have a job now. I can get there all by myself. Ask me anything, I'll tell you the right answer.
Please stop.
I can take care of myself now. So I'm ready to go home with you and I can help you take care of Ruby.
Wendy, you can't. You can't take care of a baby.
How do you know? How do you know I can't?
Wendy.
I'm ready to go home now, Audrey. I want to go home. I'm ready to go home now.
So I heard you got a job. Do you like it?
No, it sucks.
Is it on? Yes. I'm so moved by that clip that I have to remind myself I'm back in this incredible room. And thank you, Jeffrey and Julia, for really setting the tone of what we can be doing to better the situation and the panel before us. I'm honored to be here with my friends and colleagues. Ben Lewin, who is the director of Please Stand By and an award-winning filmmaker and documentarian. Ben Lewin, over here. The actress who has really defined acting in this decade, of being an extraordinary human being, as well as a phenomenal actress, Dakota Fanning. Writer of Please Stand By, and also a playwright and filmmaker and TV writer, Michael Galamko. Laura Alameddine, the founder and producer of Please Stand By and of other award-winning documentaries and films. And Brittany Sanders, who is an actress and advocate and inspiration. And Dominique Brown, singer-songwriter, actor, and advocate. So we're going to talk about the film Please Stand By as it relates to our topic today, women and autism, but also as it relates to the media shining a light on the not only the challenges of autism, but as what was so brilliantly stated before, the humanness and the neurodiversity, which I really believe this film shows. We wouldn't be here without our writer, Michael. And Michael, how did you envision this story, and what made you want to put it into a page?
I read an article in the New York Times called What Are Autistic Girls Made Of? And it was about a summer camp, and then focused on these girls with autism. And what I loved about it was that one of them, she writes fan fiction. You know, she writes Pokemon and Harry Potter fan fiction. And I was like, that's what we do. You know, we tell stories. And I thought that was so fascinating. And it drew me into the character because storytelling is powerful. You know, it changes the world. And it like exploring this character and writing the script and like doing all the research and then making the movie and meeting people, it changed my life in a lot of ways. It made me see a new perspective in the world. And it's something that, like, look, like, you know, like people need to change and a protagonist needs to grow and become something more than what they were. But at the same time, the world needs to change too. And with Wendy, the protagonist, when she tells her story, well, she's got this need to tell her story and to get out there into the world and do that and connect with people. That's what we do as storytellers, and that's how she's trying to change the world.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Laura, in your filmmaking with your partner, Dan DeBecke, you're committed to producing films that make a difference. And what is it when you saw when you read Michael's script, I'm sure a lot of things come across your desk. What was it that compelled you to put this on screen, to get behind it? And
well, first off, I think as filmmakers, when we make a movie, we try and do something that's tell stories that haven't been told before. But I think every film or every story you watch has the same journey. It has a central character that has a challenge, regardless of any of the stereotypes we can put on those characters. So for us, with Please Stand By, we just fell in love with Wendy. And she was this inspirational character. She had challenges like we all do. But for us, it was just being able to have a central character that everyone can relate to who just happens to have autism. And for us, we were really driven to Michael's story because it wasn't an issues movie. It wasn't a movie about autism, but it was about a person who just happens to have these challenges. And I think that the world needs to start viewing, you know, people as equals with different challenges instead of trying to put them in boxes. So for us, we just fell in love with Wendy.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And yes. And Ben, as an award-winning director, you brought such a sensitivity to the screen. What drew you to the film and allowed you to present it in such a humane and conscious way?
I think there were many levels at which I was able to identify with the story and with the character. I mean, one of the things that really affected me was shining a light on the creative energy boiling inside people who are often very marginalized, and how for them the world of the imagination becomes an anchor and a driving force. So what fascinated me was not just that this character had autism, but that she was also a writer, which is a personality burden in itself. But, you know, carried what a lot of other writers carry, a sense of detachment from the mainstream of society and the cultivation of a world of one's own, which becomes your heart and soul, and so I guess that particular element of it drew me to it very much. And just seeing this clip, I sort of am, you know, reliving a lot of the feelings that took place during the making of the movie. But that's one of the main things that drew me to the story.
Beautiful, beautiful. Dakota, you're an actress that isn't so in demand. What brought you to this film, and what, in portraying Wendy, how is it that you brought yourself to it and understanding autism?
Yeah, well, I think, like Laura said, I think for me it's always about finding a character or a story that I haven't personally played before, or that I feel like I don't see enough of as just a fan of film and a fan of acting. And so when I read Please Stand By and read the character of Wendy, I felt that this was a story that I hadn't seen told before, and I certainly hadn't seen it told in this way. And I mean, we've all of us have said it. I really think that the thing that I loved the most is that Wendy is so many things. She's a writer, she's a Star Trek fan, she's a knitter, she's a dog lover, and she has autism, and that's just sort of sandwiched in between all of these other things that are actually a bigger part of who she is. And so I think that we all focused in the making of the film of, this was a story about a woman who wrote a script, who was determined to get this script into the contest. And along the way, she faces many challenges, just like anyone would face challenges. And more than seeing her limitations, we see her overcoming her limitations. And I think that's something that we all can relate to. I certainly can relate to that. And I think in meeting other young women and men with autism through Elaine, I worked with Brittany and Dominic on the film, you see that the human connection is so much stronger than anything else. And so as much as I love that this film will hopefully raise awareness for the rights of women with autism or their abilities, I also just think that it's a story that people can connect to, and that is more powerful than anything, and I wanted to be a part of it for that reason. So.
Brittany, you inspire me with your persistence, and whenever I'm feeling shy about doing something, I have this little voice in my head say, well, what would Brittany do? Because you really know how to ask for what you want and to go for what you want. What was it like seeing a character like Wendy, and how did you relate to the protagonist as a woman yourself?
I can relate to Wendy. Sorry, Elaine, should I read?
No, you can talk it, and then if you need to.
Oh, okay. I can relate to Wendy. I can relate to Wendy because you know, she never gives up, and you know, she
she wanted to turn in her script and to the Paramount Studios. And is it okay if I read a little bit out of this? Sorry. I'm like the character Wendy because I too desire to reach my goals and to be accepted by others for who I am and not who they think I should be. People on the autism spectrum are so often misunderstood and made to feel sad because others see us as being difficult when in fact we're all the same, trying to live like everyone else. I related to the challenges Wendy faced with those around her because most often it is difficult to communicate on levels with others, as anyone not on the spectrum does not understand what a person who is on the spectrum deals with daily. We're easy targets as we are vulnerable because we do not always understand social cues and the dangers that are around us. While family and friends have and continue to love and support, our world is made up of indifference when acceptance would go much further.
Dom, what was it like for you to first see yourself on screen and also to be an actor in a feature film?
It was like really different, just seeing yourself up on the big screen.
And you have a story about when you came to the set and you realized that you were going to be working with Dakota Fanning. Do you want to share that story?
So Dakota is like my #1 favorite movie actress. Like, we both grew up together, like, not like close, but, like saying she was young in the movie business and I was young watching her.
And when you saw that you were going to be, I remember sitting with you and you saw that she was on the set, how did that make you feel?
I was really excited. I was so surprised. I never thought that I would be working with Dakota Fanning until now.
There you are. Ben, you really took the lead, and Laura, in hiring adults with disabilities to portray adults with disabilities. And like we all here go, well, like, duh, But it was something that was a definite part of your decision in making the film. I'm wondering, Ben and Laura, if you could comment on that, and then all of you, of what it was like to have and be working with adults with disabilities in the film.
Well, from a director's point of view, it was a no-brainer. I was bringing people on set who were already committed and who brought that commitment into the tiniest details. And, in filmmaking, the devil is in the details, and when we entered that facility, we felt like we were in a real place. So, as I say, I didn't feel I was doing anyone any favors. I feel that the people with Dom and Brittany and the others who participated were doing us a favor.
I just wish we had more of
It's a wonderful opportunity to thank them here before the representatives of Poland and Kazakhstan and Italy and Israel for all this, and how wonderful it is that they have managed to get the attention of people who matter.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
I mean, why not? It's the fact that we have to ask the question and make it. Nobody gets a pat on the back for doing it, but I am happy that we're cracking the door open and allowing people to come and do what they're really passionate and great about, because that's what this business should be about. That's what everything should be about. So I just wish we had, more scenes with them, and if we had known what incredible actors they were, we'd have, included even more of them. So
It feels like this is just the beginning, though. That there will be more, much more.
Elaine.
Yes.
Is it okay if I say something?
I would love you to say something.
Dakota, I would love to work with you again in the future, and Michael and Laura and Ben. Dakota, I would love to work with you again in the future. Michael and Laura and Ben, I would like to work with you guys again in the future. I had a great and wonderful time with all of you guys and Dominique. Dominique, we became very close friends, and I am very happy and I'm very thankful that we met. Dakota, Ben, and Laura, and Michael, I am very happy and I am very thankful that I got the opportunity to work with you guys. I would like to work. Sorry. Is it okay if I say one last thing? One last thing, and then we'll ask Dom. Okay. Dakota, I would love to work with you again in the future.
I would love to work with you too. Yes, it was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Brittany. That's very sweet.
And Dom, as a result, this was your first film, and as a result of this, you now are getting roles. Dom is going to be has a reoccurring role on the TV show Atypical, which you'll see next season. And how did being and working? We talk a lot about being following our dreams and living our dreams and becoming working professionals. And both, as you know, Brittany's and Dominique's dream was to be working professionals. And having this experience, and Please Stand By, actually gave that opportunity. How did this help prepare you for your work on Atypical and being on the set?
It just helped me got to be more creative with the character that I'm playing. And, I definitely think this will be another good experience for me.
Great, great. We heard earlier on about the vulnerability of women on the spectrum, and there's one scene in particular that speaks to me. Well, so many of the scenes speak to me on the film, but one is when Wendy is traveling and she meets the woman with the baby and her husband. And I noticed it the second time I saw the film that they actually look at her as if she's a target. It's something, that Amy was saying, that was saying before. And I never saw that the first time. And I mean, it's definitely in the writing and in the brilliant directing and obviously the acting. Ben, I know you're so humble when you talk about your directing, but what was it that because you brought that out, that they saw her as a target. What was it that they see? And in the writing as well. You know the place where I'm talking about.
I think that they saw someone who was naive and honest, who told it as it was. And this in itself is unusual and makes you vulnerable. So I think that was the element. But Dakota, how did you feel about that particular scene?
With that particular scene, I think, it's definitely you see kind of an example of what the previous panel was saying. You see Wendy's, you see some of her vulnerabilities showing, and you see people who take advantage of that. And Wendy doesn't make any mistakes that allow that to happen. It's really how the other people are seeing her, and it's their problem that makes this kind of negative situation happen to Wendy, but nevertheless it still does happen to Wendy, and Wendy's left on her own to pick up those pieces. And I think it's one of the low moments for Wendy on her journey, but you do see how she is capable of learning from that and using her voice in a different way the next time. You know, I think that that's the wonderful thing about the film, is that you have these experiences peppered throughout that you show that Wendy is able and to overcome these limitations, and you see her succeed.
That's great. So just in closing, perhaps if each of you could sum up, how would you like this film to be perceived and make a difference in the autism community?
I'd like you to all watch the movie, and I feel that we will have achieved our goal, and the message will speak for itself.
I agree. I think that there's an underlying message for those with autism or those with loved ones who have autism, and you might relate to it in a more specific or different way, but nevertheless, it's a very human story that we all will find relatable, and aspects of Wendy that you can understand, whether or not you are personally affected by autism. So yeah, see the movie, and it's also very hopeful and uplifting, and I think that's important to have in the world today as well.
Like I said before, I think it's just the beginning, and at the same time, like I was thinking, like as a writer and as somebody that thinks about what am I going to do next creatively, I'm always thinking, well, I'd love to continue to do some work in this world, but then I caught myself and I was like, this is our world. That's the world of the film, and that's the world in which we all live. And so, like I said, I hope it's the beginning. For me, it's just the beginning, and I want to do more stories in this.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think for me, what I hope that this movie does is that, and we specifically make the choice in the film to never mention the word autism and define Wendy, because to us, she is a person first. She's a woman. She's a writer. She's a sister. She's a friend. She's so many things before she's just someone who has her challenges. And I just hope that this film can challenge people to look at people as people first. And that, to me, is the biggest gift that the film can give. So,
Brittany, what would you like people to take away from the film? Is there something?
For people to take away from the film. I'm so Elin, I'm very sorry.
That's okay. What did you like best about the film?
I liked the whole film. I liked the whole film. It sends a positive message.
Thank you. Dom, how about for you? What would you like people to take away, to know about the film? Or about something you would like to tell people here about an actor with autism?
Just to take away that people in the community of autism definitely need a chance to be seen, heard, and be understandable. It's not just about normal people, it's about people with disabilities as well. We are all unique, and we should believe in that.
Elaine, could I just add a quick thought? You saw a very dramatic scene, but a lot of the film is very funny, and one of the most intimate scenes is performed in Klingon. I just wanted to let you know.
Absolutely. So Thank you. I'm looking forward to more. Dom is starring in an original musical as well with the Miracle Project about finding love and friendship. And it's called 185 Wilshire, A Love Story. So, and he helped write some of the music for that as well. Some of the, so it's happening. People here are leaders in changing the way the world perceives autism and women with autism. And thank you so much for inviting us. And
thank you so much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaine, for your moderation. Thank you to all of the cast and crew, producers, writers, for joining us. It's a wonderful discussion. Thank you, Dakota, for joining us. And we look forward to seeing the film, and we invite you all to go and see this film and continue this conversation. So we're going to move to our next panel. I'd like to invite the panelists to join us. We're going to stay in these chairs here in the front. So I'd like to invite Dr. Helen Egger, the chair of the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry of NYU Langone Medical Center. Sarai Pala, a medical doctor and translator and self-advocate from South Africa. Beth Finkelstein, executive director of Felicity House. And Hadass Arnon Sharabi, attorney with Alut, Israeli Society for Children and Adults with Autism. And I'm going to join them as moderator again. They're on the side. How do you find the movie?
People were asking how to find the movie. Please stand by. It's on demand, and so you can get it on demand.
So this, the question of diagnosis has come up already just naturally in our conversations, and clearly it's a very important one, and I think it's one that also touches the minds of, we've talked about obviously we're one community, this is one world, but the autism community and outside of the autism community, people that are not engaging with people on the spectrum necessarily on a daily basis or thinking about these issues. This issue of diagnosis, I think, is in the popular consciousness. That, there are more boys out there than girls with autism. So where are the missing girls and how many are there? And what does it mean for girls to be undiagnosed or misdiagnosed or diagnosed late? It's really a very serious issue when you look at empowering women and girls with autism. So we're very, very pleased to be having this portion of the conversation. And I'd like to start with Dr. Egger. If you could tell us, really sort of lay the groundwork for us. So what is the difference in diagnosis with girls and boys right now, and women and men, because we know there's a big difference. And can you give us a snapshot of where we are in terms of the numbers, and what are the reasons?
Great, thank you, and thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. So the current data on the rates of autism in males and females is 1 in 68 people with autism, and that's current data suggests it's 1 in 42 boys and 1 in 189 girls. So that's a ratio of about 4 to 1 of males to females. There are also data that show that girls are likely to be diagnosed much later than boys are, and also that the girls who are diagnosed are on the lower spectrum of intellectual abilities and also may have more behavior issues. But there are a lot of reasons for us to really question these data and to think that there are missing girls and women. And why is that? So I just wanted to go through some of the reasons from my perspective as a child psychiatrist and as a research scientist. So the first thing is most of the studies include boys. There really are very few, relatively few girls in studies. So when you think of a ratio of 4 to 1, that's actually just an average in a bunch of studies, and those averages range from 2 to 1 to 7 to 1. The other thing that has been raised here is that our diagnostic criteria have been derived from studies of boys, so that we really, I think, don't yet know whether they are absolutely the best criteria for girls and women. The other thing has to do with much of our experience, our social experience as women. Girls, in many ways, are much more able in women social networks and relationships to camouflage, to kind of blend in and to mask the challenges that they're experiencing in their social interactions, and they may not be recognized. It's a shy girl, or she's, just likes to play alone. The other thing is that restricted interests, the data are saying that restricted interests in girls are less common. But I would suggest that perhaps it's differences in what the restricted interests are. So perhaps that women and girls don't have as much focus on trains or on numbers or some of the sort of classic interests, but a focus on things that might be thought to be gender appropriate, like dolls or other things, may actually represent restricted interests. The other thing is that people with autism have high rates of other disorders, particularly psychiatric issues, depression, anxiety, eating disorders, ADHD, and it's much more common for girls and women to have one of those problems diagnosed as the primary issue, like anxiety, and not have the autism recognized. And then lastly, I think in here we have to realize that across the globe, girls and women have less access to medical care. They have less access to education, and in fact have less access to participating in research and creating knowledge. So what is the true rate? I don't think we know. I would posit from some of the information that it's probably more in the 2-to-1 ratio. There really are data in brain science to suggest that the brains of females with autism process social information differently than the brains of males with autism. In fact, there's one study suggesting that girls with autism, their brains work more like a typical same-aged boy. So now, on the other hand, I think we just don't have enough information. So just in concluding with this, I'd like to really emphasize from the scientific and clinical perspective that we have real limits in our knowledge. And so when we're thinking about the recognition of autism in girls and in women, this is about access. We've talked about it. It's access to service, it's access to support, it's access to being diagnosed, but it's really access to knowledge. And not to receiving the knowledge, but participating in our creation of knowledge. And I really think that advances in digital technology actually give us an opportunity to think about how we can do different kinds of research and give us the opportunity to partner with men and with women and boys and girls with autism and really advance our understanding in a way that really represents everyone, and also, the phrase I would use, helps us to see the unseen. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Obviously all the women on the panel have a very broad experience and a lot to tell us about, but we just want to tease out some of the issues. So from Dr. Paula, I'm going to try and focus on just girls with you for this first question. So as a woman on the spectrum yourself, what does this diagnosis disparity, gender disparity mean for girls? What is it like to be either undiagnosed or perhaps worse, misdiagnosed?
I think I'm going to start off by pointing out the fact that I'm sure a lot of you have noticed that I look somewhat different from the average woman in the room, And this is no criticism. You all look beautiful. I think you all look stunning. But when I read the guideline to say the dress code guideline and it said business casual, immediately I thought, oh, that's. They wanted me to wear the most uncomfortable clothes possible. And the only way I can get around that is I'm going to have to use all my, because I find that the world refers to us as self-advocates. I refer to myself as an autism superhero. So I'm going to have to use all of my superpowers to overcome the discomfort of what it feels like to wear these, these clothes. And So I was like, well, if I'm gonna have to use my superpowers, I'm gonna wear a superhero outfit. So this is my, and this is something that I think unfortunately, it's something that we can all see, but we don't want to talk about it, you know, because no one commented, I mean, I got compliments on my hair, thank you very much. I got compliments on but nobody explicitly said, oh, you know, this, your choice, you know, but unfortunately, you still get the sideways glances and the, you know, but why, you know, and that's a very challenging thing to deal with as a woman. So when I think of what it's like to be misdiagnosed, I think of myself. You know, I mean, when I looked at the question, I thought, this is a great, I mean, I'm a classic example of that, because until I was in my 30s, I knew that I was different, and I knew that my life was, and the world was treating me very differently to how it was treating other women who were my age and who were from the same background as me, but I couldn't explain why. So this manifested as things like, I mean, I am now a medical translator because I taught myself Japanese, I taught myself German. I can say complicated words like gisei, fukuko josen, ki no teikasho. You know what I mean? That's a very, but people would focus on the fact that I can't boil an egg, or I can't clean my room, or I can't pick up when someone's flirting with me. And it would always be these disparaging comments, not, oh, wow, you know, geez, you taught yourself a language. Hey, you got through med school. Hey, wow, you know, you emigrated on your own, you know, to a different country that you had never been to before, because I'd never stepped foot in Germany before I moved there. I just went. None of that stuff came up. It's always the, you know, inappropriate reactions. Oh, sorry, you're not dressed the way you're supposed to be dressed. You know, you're too loud, you're too opinionated. You should sit down, be quiet. You know, these are all, and no one told me, wow, we're so amazed that, you know, you've excelled at all of these things. No, it's always putting you down. So for me personally, as a self-advocate, or as I prefer, superhero, autism superhero, I've decided that one of the biggest areas where I felt this discrimination and these negative, or the negative impact of being someone different, as I said before I gave it a name, was in the world of employment. Because especially working in, okay, I started off in medicine, but then I switched careers and went to IT consulting, also because I taught myself programming when I was in university. See, while you guys were having friends and boyfriends and things, so this is what I was doing, right? so I switched careers and I went to Accenture, and now I was in an environment where behavior, dress code, you know, body language, and all of those things were even more important than they were when I was, you know, working as a doctor. And it was extremely difficult. I found it very hard, and the outcome of that was after 4 years, I quit and started a freelance career. So my goal now is to create an environment that will embrace people with autism, to create a company, to create autism startups, to really give people the chance to shine and be commended for the things that make them different and weird, because we need that in the world. So I hope this has made a difference.
Thank you very, very much. So Beth Finkelstein, Executive Director of Felicity House. You know, we're hearing a lot of stories, and I think maybe it's just the norm for women who are later in life to have been diagnosed later. So how is Felicity House helping women to sort of cope with that?
Yeah, absolutely. We see women at Felicity House share with us their stories of being diagnosed, and it's not unusual for us to hear stories that take place in the 20s and 30s and beyond. And while Felicity House is a community space and not a research institution, we do have some information on the age of diagnosis of our participants, because a professionally documented diagnosis of autism is a requirement for participation. So we can estimate that 35% of the women at Felicity House received their diagnosis after the age of 18, while only 20% of our participants received their diagnosis before the age of 4. I think one important benefit of a diagnosis of autism is access to services and supports. And if your diagnosis is delayed, your access to those services and supports over your lifetime is limited. Unfortunately, there are very limited services available for adult women on the autism spectrum. In general, and we've discussed this a lot here today, the needs of adult women on the autism spectrum may not be very well understood and certainly not well recognized. What this means in practice is that if a woman can clear the formidable hurdle of finding an evaluator who is familiar with both ASD in adulthood and in women, and she obtains a diagnosis of autism, it's going to be really challenging, if not impossible, for her to find supports from there. And we know this firsthand at Felicity House because while we're a resource that's local to New York City, we get really desperate calls from all over the country and even internationally from women and girls saying, I'm looking for diagnostic support, I'm looking for clinical services, I'm looking for other kinds of support, and I'm just not finding them. A lack of readily available services and supports is a concern for many adults with autism, many adults with developmental disabilities, but given some of the challenges that we've talked about today and we'll talk more about that lie at the intersection of being both autistic and female, it's especially dire. Another concern I think about with a delayed diagnosis of autism are comorbids that Helen was talking about. One clinician we work with says that she feels the later she sees a woman diagnosed with autism, the more likely it is she'll see a comorbid condition. And we see that at Felicity House. 71% of our participants report a comorbid condition, the most common being depression and anxiety, and 34% of our participants report a psychiatric hospitalization at some point over their lives. Often when women at Felicity House talk about their experience of being diagnosed, they describe it sometimes as just a relief. And Julia talked about this a little bit this morning, that before they were diagnosed, they felt like there was something wrong with them, that they weren't normal, that they were doing things wrong. And the diagnosis really helped put themselves into perspective and helped sort of facilitate a period of self-acceptance. And I can't imagine that that doesn't have positive ramifications on mental health and overall well-being. I think the most important part of your question, though, is really about how do we meet these needs and what are these needs. I really wish there was more research about adults with autism. I wish there was more research about girls and women with autism. I wish there was more just general understanding and acceptance in our communities. Facing the lack of that research, what I think we can do today, a lot of folks have already suggested, I'm going to second, is that let's ask autistic women what they need. Let's learn from their life experiences, let's hear about their life experiences, and let's position ourselves as partners in confronting some of these issues that they're facing. The founder of Felicity House, who herself is a woman on the autism spectrum, when she was conceiving of the organization, really thought a lot about her time in autism support groups, experiences for adults with autism, and she found them to be geared overwhelmingly toward men. She found unwanted sexual advances really common for the minority women in those groups. And I'd also just advocate that we carve out more spaces and programs just for women. And finally, of course, I'm going to say that I think a wonderful way to meet the needs of women on the spectrum is Felicity House. That's my job. And I think one of the things that our participants regularly comment on and say is important to them about our organization in particular is that we are non-clinical. So we're not providing therapy, we're not changing anybody, we're not fixing anybody. We're offering a place to have a safe, fun social experience and a connection to a network of other people who are going to give you support and commiseration and sisterhood. And I think those are the kinds of supports and needs that, I mean, they're important to me in my life, I'm sure, to a lot of people.
Thank you very much. We're going to finish up with the Israeli Society for Children and Adults with Autism. We'll go to Ms. Shirabi. So, we're talking about the question of diagnosis and the disparities there. So looking at, and also this has already come up in the conversation, but looking at a girl's or a woman's place in society, so to speak, and expectations and perceptions of girls and women, what dynamics do you think are at place feeding into this disparity in diagnosis?
Okay. Does it work? Okay. Okay. Well, this is an interesting point of view to look on the subject, since nowadays the place of girls and women in the family is not as strict as it was in the past. In addition, communities and families have changed fundamentally due to the shift in equality between women and men. The equality takes focus on identical equality, yet sometimes misses the unique qualities of women that should be taken into consideration. This obviously manifests in misdiagnosis within the family and the community, as we will see next. To begin with, most of the frameworks today strive for equality, yet are built on the basis of mostly male-oriented knowledge, and that is the beginning of the problem. One good example can be seen in the manifestations of signs and symptoms of ASD in girls. The knowledge we obtain regarding ASD is focused mostly on male symptoms. When an ASD woman acts within her community or family in a certain manner that should be diagnosed as ASD, it will often be undiagnosed because her symptoms may simply be overlooked. Next come the behavioral expectation from a girl in a community. When a girl is shy, quiet or does not step up to take the spotlight in a discussion, this seems like a normal behavior. As such, most fathers or mothers or community members will not speculate that such a girl might be on the spectrum. Also, since a girl communicates better than a boy by default, it might look within the family like the girl is conversing as expected, and being verbally and cognitively adequate, parents can easily miss signs of ASD, thinking that some untraditional behaviors are just phase of growth. Within time, these behaviors become rooted in the family and in the community, and thus behavior that could and should have been diagnosed as ASD goes about undiagnosed, due to the fact that the girl's behavior just naturally camouflage the usual well-known signs of autism, making her seem problematic or unwilling rather than on the spectrum. In addition, there is the Western way of life. In our busy and stressed world today, families where both parents go to work leave their children in the professional hands of teachers and instructors within their community, more often than not, even while doing their duty in the best possible way. Since the awareness to the various manifestations in girls on the spectrum is insufficient, these professionals will easily miss these signs that could make them guide parents to pursue further investigation of the subject. Well, that being said, side by side with the complexity in diagnosis, I want to emphasize the importance of support within the community. We in Alut began to organize designated meetings that aim to give these girls and women with ASD and their families a place to share their everyday struggles and difficulties, to support them, to give them a safe space to just be themselves and to think together about the main services they need. To conclude, there is a great importance to awareness within families and communities to the differences manifestations of ASD in girls. Such awareness could be a key to realizing that equality, as it is understood today, will not camouflage ASD in girls. I'm also happy to say that even though there is still work to do in this field, the understanding that gender equality does not necessarily mean that all aspects need to be identical is growing. On the contrary, I will say that equal is different. Equality lies in differences. It is becoming clear that true equality shall rise from accepting, understanding, and addressing the different things that make women and men what they really are.
Thank you very much. So we're going to wrap up this panel. We haven't talked about too much about boys and men, but when we talk about the disparities in diagnosis, there's, I guess, the assumption, and it is true, that boys and men are benefiting because they're benefiting from the diagnosis and having more of a framework and more services and support that they might need. But I think there are probably also ways that boys and men, and there are many boys and men in the audience here today listening, who are not benefiting because there are missing girls in their community. So can you talk about that? And I guess if you don't mind, we'll just go in the same order.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, that when you have this sort of segregation, and particularly where there are social issues, it doesn't give the opportunity for people to have a full community together. And so, I don't think this is girls and women and not boys and men, because we also have disparities in the US for African American people with autism not getting recognized. I mean, there's a lot of other disparities that are on the table and divisions in our clinical care and particularly in research that really need to be overcome.
I actually, just thinking about this, I envisioned what the typical status of a male person with autism is. People think of them as having, heightened abilities, or they must be a savant, they must have some kind of gift, oh, they're alone because they're eccentric and they're working on, difficult mental things that, we can't understand. But when you compare that to what it's like for women, and it seems to be like they identify with that themselves, as that themselves. And when you contrast them to how it feels to be a woman on the autism spectrum, it's completely different. Because you're the weirdo, the outlier, the one who doesn't know how to behave. You're the one who, is inappropriate and, says inappropriate things at inappropriate times. And just that difference in identity, just thinking about that is, it's really tough. As someone who experiences this, it's extremely difficult. And I'm glad to hear that it's, this is reflected by the people on the panel with me. So, yeah.
I think one thing I can share that I hear a lot at Felicity House from the women that come is that their interactions with men with autism are difficult, and that often the men's communication style or overtures toward our women are not always appropriate or easy to handle. So I don't know the answer to your question, but I do wonder if maybe a piece of that is related to men and boys with autism kind of being segregated into autism programs and having somewhat limited interactions with other women. I don't know, but it's an interesting point.
Well, I want to emphasize also that I think that... Try and keep that mic closer. Oh, excuse me. I think that one must say that boys are less affected from the misdiagnosis, they're not directly affected from the disparity in misdiagnosis. But I want to emphasize that research about misdiagnosis and the manifestations of girls with the special manifestations of girls will also contribute to find services for boys that are sometimes also unique, and that way I think both genders can benefit from it.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking the panel. I'd like to invite you to take your seats in the audience, and I'm going to invite the next panel up to join us. So the next panel is about the heightened risk that girls and women face of violence, sexual exploitation, and abuse. And the moderator of our panel is from UN Women. That's the UN organization that advocates for women and girls' rights. And her name is Sophie Brown. She's a policy analyst. So you can all sit here in the chairs. Oh, you're coming up? Okay. So over to you, Sophie, also to introduce the rest of the panelists.
Okay, is that on? Everyone can hear me? Thank you, Jeff. Firstly, let me introduce the panelists. We have Dina Gazner to my left. She's on the board of directors at ARC, which is the Autism Research Centre. I've got... No? Just the ARC. Excuse me, just the ARC. Sharon Devanport, Executive Director at Autism Women's Network, to my right. Mallory Cruz at the end. She's the blogger of Things That Cause Autism.tumblr.com. And Reinweg Trustadottir, if that was correct. She's the director of the Centre for Disability Studies at the University of Iceland. And as Jeff mentioned, I'm Sophie Brown. I'm a member of the Disability Task Team and Research and Policy Analyst at UN Women. And I've got the honour of moderating this panel. I want to thank the organisers and self-advocates in particular who make this day happen and keep these important issues on our agendas, and especially our courageous speakers that we've already heard from so far. We're undeniably at a turning point around sexual abuse and harassment against women and girls, yet comparatively little attention is paid to the heightened risks and barriers that women and girls with autism face. When different aspects of a woman or girl's or a non-binary individual's identity intersect, their exposure to discrimination, stigma, and abuse is amplified. The scope of the issue is staggering, but despite this, it is largely overlooked by policymakers and wider society, and too often it goes uncounted, unprosecuted, and unpunished, and many women and girls are re-victimised. We have a long way to go, but the steps are being taken in the right direction, led by autistic women and girls. With our very limited time today to cover such a complex area, let's turn to our experts and self-advocates to learn more. So we'll start with Dina and talk about the dearth of the research and evidence in this area. We'd like to hear a little bit from you about what the data does reveal about the scope of this issue, and we'd also like to hear from you about the links between diagnostic bias and maltreatment, misinformation and autism, and risks of violence among women and girls with autism.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you for your leadership in helping us coordinate this. I'm honored today to participate and wish to thank the organizers and the member states for their support for this very important day. It's a true privilege to be seated here at the United Nations. I want to say that I've spent most of my day today scratching out my prior notes in my speech because we have had such a phenomenal array of beautiful, extraordinary human beings today speaking so eloquently about the needs of women with autism. I do want to take one brief moment to convey as well that we are not forgetting anyone. The self-advocacy community has been the loudest, most persistent voice in addressing the needs of the breadth of the autism community. I also want to say that this particular topic has great relevance to our community because, according to the NAS, 2/3 of individuals with autism out of a 1,300-person sample communicated that they needed support for personal care. And even more of those people include individuals who are sometimes needing direct physical contact for that self-care. We're not forgetting those voices, and we're not forgetting their vulnerability and their exposure to abuse that happens due to their isolation, due to the fact that they're intimately engaged with individuals for that self-care, and due to the fact that they're working one-to-one with individuals in situations that put them at great harm. We are not forgetting you. I'd also like to convey that we are not forgetting the fact that we're really not talking about simply males, females, gender fluid, gender different people. We're talking about an internalized expression of autism as well as an externalized expression. Individuals who express their autism more internally have a much different kind of risk because we are presumed to be able to know simply by being in community, and that is a vast inaccuracy. We must be and must have direct instruction. And how can we receive that instruction if we're not diagnosed until we're 30 years old? How can we benefit from that diagnosis if we spend absolutely no time after we receive that document working to understand how autism has affected us and working to understand how we can use the new identity, the complete and whole identity as an autistic woman, to now reframe ourselves and redesign strategies and supports for ourselves to continue to foster our empowerment and our resilience as we move forward. I'd also like to convey that the CDC is not helping us. The incidence rate, according to the CDC, that we have seen in so many places that put women at the lowest level of identity at 8 years old, of 1 in 169, I believe, it doesn't help that they don't quantify and understandably explain that 8-year-old girls are not identified at that point. Very, very few of us get our diagnosis by the age of 8. Yet, grant people, research people are using that statistic to justify not having a broad sample size in research design. They're saying, well, our representative sample is reflective of what the CDC is stipulating is the standard. This is a vast inaccuracy, and it's hurting us in research. We need to have much higher standards in regard to making sure that the sample sizes are reflective of the breadth of the population. But the crux of my testimony today is about this, that the most ruptured relationship that adult women with autism will face is that relationship with the very first mental health provider they approach for support, who tells them that they're not autistic, who tells them that they couldn't possibly have this because it's a male characteristic, a male diagnosis. When we do not have that framework of self, when we do not have that complete and intact identity, we experience there our greatest vulnerability. Our first victimization is the denial of our diagnosis, and we need to change that.
Thank you, Dina. Sharon. Talk about the tone that language sets with respect to how girls with autism in particular are viewed, and what impact does this have on her vulnerability to abuse?
Sure, thank you. First of all, I'd like for all of us to think about a time in our childhood when we had something negative said about us, we had our feelings hurt, we were called a name, and if we're really, really honest with ourselves, we can remember that incident because we carried it with us either for a lot of years where it impacted how we felt about ourselves, how we developed our self-esteem, what we thought about others, how we viewed ourselves in the light of others. And sometimes we can even admit today that it still does impact us on some level. Psychologists have said, without a doubt, that disrespectful and negative language has a direct impact on the development of low self-esteem in children. There was an interesting study in 2016 at the University of Washington where they said that by the age of 5, children had already developed enough self-esteem that it was measurable. So what does that mean? It means that by the tender age of 5, a child has comprehended enough of what's been said about them, enough of their environment, what it is speaking to them on who they are, so much so that they have developed a sense of self, self-worth, self-value. So let's take a look now at April, and what April, when you have these awareness campaigns going on, what is that saying to autistic girls when they see like the buzzwords going around in the autism community? We hear autism described as tragedy. Girls hear that they're a burden, perhaps that they are responsible for the breakup of their parents' marriage. I've seen memes on those. I'm not kidding you. They are around the internet. And these are the things that we know for sure are getting into the minds of girls and how they are looking at themselves. And we know this because you can ask autistic adults who have gone through childhood, who have talked about how they were described. If they hear a parent talking to a teacher, say, you know, like Janie had a behavior, or she was behaving badly on the playground. Instead of saying, listen, can we get some more supports for Janie on the playground? See how simple that was? You don't have to use language and use the words bad and bad behaviors. We have to really look at the overall impact that language has. In another study in the UK, it was a powerful study. It looked at children and violence. And in particular, there was one part of the study that looked at child sexual assault and abuse and prevention. And they actually took this section to see what offenders are telling us. 49% of these predators said, now that's half, so 49% said that they were attracted to and sought out, actively sought out their victims based on a lack of confidence and a low self-esteem. So, you know, we know the statistics, we know the numbers, we've heard it here already before, this morning especially a lot, on the vulnerability of autistic women. We know that we're more likely to be victims of crimes than to perpetrate. We know these things. We have no control over that. However, we do have control over the language that we use, the messages that we send with that language, how we frame conversations around autistic girls. And we have a unique opportunity in their formative years to empower them to send messages that they are loved, that they are lovable, that they are worthy, that they are okay just the way they are, that they don't need to change. I'm so grateful to the United Nations for having all of us here today. I really am. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sharon. Mallory, tell us a little bit more about the vulnerabilities that women and girls face and why, and how gender roles and expectations in particular affect these risks of violence.
Thank you. So I just want to quickly say that I was actually really surprised that I was asked on to such a serious panel, because the blog that I run is a comedy blog. But the more that I thought about it, I remembered that the whole reason that I had made that blog is because autistic people online wanted a place that we could joke about how holistic people, that's people who don't have autism, how they view us. And a lot of it's a user-run blog, and everybody submits a cause, and we're making fun of the strange causes that people think cause autism. And so I want to begin by saying that I believe it starts young. There's so many ways that people can be abused. There's emotional, verbal, physical, sexually. And I used to work with kids, which, you know, no one would ever think that an autistic person would be good with kids, but I think it was very helpful, actually. But one of the trainings that I got was that what we call bullying is abuse. It's straight up, it's abuse. And what makes kids vulnerable to bullying? It's the kids who stand out, it's the kids who are weird. Sometimes it's racial, and a lot of disabled kids are bullied because they're weird or they're different. They don't think the same way. They don't say things the way we would, everybody else would say it. And of kids, you know, when we look at who's more vulnerable on a gender difference, women, girls are likely to be abused. And to tie into the gender aspect, I think girls are abused because I had heard someone say, and I never thought about it, but a lot of kids with autism, you know, they don't, because they don't follow the social rules that society has set. Gender is somewhat of a social construct based on how to perform gender, how to dress and present based on the gender that you have been labeled with. And so, you know, I grew up as being called a tomboy, but it was not a thing that I was trying to be one of the boys. I was comfortable with the things that boys typically do. I was comfortable with the way that boys typically dress. And so that sets, for a girl, that will make her more vulnerable because people will notice. People notice that. And, sorry, I'm a little nervous. So, and like I said, a huge thing that I also want to focus on is abusers. What makes someone a prime target for abuse? Because I really want to put a lot of abuse on the people who are doing the abusing. It's like, it's like Sharon said, the low self-esteem, the confidence, but also the lack of knowing social cues makes a lot of young girls more more easily manipulated. And that goes for, that also people will exploit the self-esteem, and they know the social situations better. And it goes on into adulthood. Women's, you don't just suddenly, oh, I'm 18, I know how the world works now. You're still, I guess, lacking in what's, in knowledge of how society works. And so there are adults who will see that, and in physical, emotional, sexually, they will exploit those vulnerabilities.
Thanks, Mallory. And Reinweg, what actions can be taken to prevent violence against women and girls with autism? And what's considered some of the best practices in improving access to justice, in particular, which we've heard a little bit about this morning already, and providing support for these women and girls?
Well, I think I want to highlight in terms of prevention what many people have said before today, is that violence, abuse, harassment, discrimination against autistic women and girls and disabled women in general are intrinsically connected to their marginalization, their exclusion, social exclusion, powerlessness, and their devaluation and subordinate status in our society. There are actually no safe spaces. They experience discrimination, abuse, and various forms of violence in all spheres of life, in their private lives, in the public sphere, and actually, and very sadly, in the very services and support mechanisms that we have put in place to protect and support them. So effective prevention has to address very, very broadly the social situation and vulnerabilities. And we have to really look at our culture, the way we violate people who are vulnerable. So the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities calls for a very broad social changes and social justice for all. And I think we need a very fundamental social change to prevent this kind of violence, which is very, very widespread. I also want to go back to the service-related violence. It is incredibly alarming how much violence is conducted within our services. And we have seen reports from all over the world about the violence within especially segregated residential services and other kinds of segregated services. Segregated services are danger zones with regard to violence. Abusers, like we've heard before, abusers, they seek places where they find vulnerable people they can prey on away from the public eye. So inclusive settings and inclusive services are incredibly important in terms of preventing violence, extremely important. And we need to focus our attention on services to try to prevent, raise awareness and prevent violence within these services. So going to best practices, there is a lot of information about what are best practices. in terms of access to justice. And we need to have in place formal issues such as relevant legislation that needs to be also implemented. We need formal complaint mechanisms that also autistic women and the people around them know about and are aware of. And autistic women and girls need to get support to file complaints. And we then need to acknowledge alternative methods of communication as just as acceptable and credible as more common ways of communication. And there is a great need to educate police officers, lawyers, prosecutors, judges, and other people who work in the justice system about disability, about autism, and about violence perpetrated against especially disabled women and autistic women. The best practices that have been identified in terms of access to justice and support for women in general, autistic and disabled women who have experienced violence are numerous. And in my research, it has been very eye-opening for me to learn that disabled women, it is more important for them to get access to justice than access to support services after being violated. They want it acknowledged that they have been wronged and that there is consequences for the perpetrator. So in terms of putting in place good practices, it is essential that disabled and autistic women are very active in the development of these programs or practices and that they are employed. Otherwise, we will go off the rail because they are the experts. And these practices that are seen as best practices, they have a few characteristics. They cater to the range of women, not just in terms of impairments or disability, but also in terms of the intersection of who we all are. They take a human rights focus, and they are grounded in the social understanding of disability, not what is wrong with a person. And they need to be accessible for all women, also autistic women, and they need to listen to their stories. They listen to their stories and believe them. Many disabled and autistic women are not believed when they say that they have been violated. It's incredibly important that they are believed. These best practices, they respect the self-determination of autistic women and base their practices on their will and preferences. They promote self-empowerment, are knowledgeable about disabled and autistic women and girls and the violence particular to them, because some of it is the same kind of violence, and some forms of violence are particular to disabled and autistic women. And these best practices, they also include and employ autistic women. So the slogan of the Disabled People's Movement internationally, "Nothing about us without us," is incredibly important when putting any services, supports, policies in place for disabled and autistic people. They need to be meaningfully and actively involved in order for these practices to be relevant and meet the needs of autistic and disabled women and girls.
Thank you. We're very short on time, so I'll very quickly wrap up. We've heard from the panel about the need for more rigorous evidence and understanding, about how gender roles and expectations affect women and girls and individuals with diverse gender identities, vulnerabilities, as well as diagnostic bias and the impacts of this, as well as language and perceptions, and how this devalues women and girls' rights, and therefore the need to empower women and girls with autism. And finally, we heard about prevention and some of the best practice examples for improving access to justice, support systems, the need for safe space, inclusive services, and the need to do nothing short but work towards fundamental social change. So it's clear our work is cut out for all of us, and indeed it is incumbent upon all of us as a community of researchers, practitioners, policymakers, educators, parents, allies, and most importantly, the self-advocates, to work together and keep convening these spaces. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, and thank you again to all of the panelists. We have 2 more sessions before we wrap up the day, and the next one is our second wonderful movie. This film is called Keep the Change, and it's a little bit different, and it's actually a lot different from the first because the main characters are people on the spectrum, and the side actors are the people who are not on the spectrum. I've seen the film. It is absolutely wonderful, and if there needed to be any proof that a person on the spectrum can carry a film, this is the proof that we've got. So you're in for a treat. We'd like to invite the panelists to come and join us on the podium. And yep, so you can come and join us on the podium, take your spaces, your seats, and we're going to roll a clip for you, and then our moderator, Heidi Landis, who is a specialist in creative art, is going to lead a discussion. So roll the clips.
You do realize those people are weird in there, don't you?
Huh? No.
No, what do you mean, no? You don't know that they're not exactly normal?
No.
I mean, they have you brainwashed or something?
What's brainwashed?
Like they think for you. You don't want to be like that. You want to be normal like me. Sorry, I sneezed.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I just wanted. It's been a very hot day today.
I bet. It's really hotsy-totsy today.
You don't have to say stuff like that. It's kind of irritating. I mean, hotsy-totsy, sharing is caring.
Yummy in my tummy.
See, there you go again. I mean, why do you say stuff like that? It's very irritating.
So in other words, it rubs you in the wrong way?
Yeah, that's right.
So meaning it's not your cup of tea and it doesn't float your boat?
See, you're doing it again. You don't want people to think you're abnormal or anything like that, right? Like those people at that program.
I don't know.
No offense or anything, but I think you're above them. What's the problem anyway? I don't know what's wrong with you.
Well, I have autism.
Is that it?
No. I also have an LD.
What is that, like a venereal thing?
No, it's a learning disability.
Oh. Well, I guess everybody's got problems.
That's true. So what's your problem, David?
I don't know, I guess I got a little bit stressed out this year, but, you know, I've been getting better, you know? You know?
Hi. Oh, how lovely to meet you.
I'm Sarah Silverstein, David Cohen's girlfriend. And I love being a performing artist, singing, acting, and working with you with these. What about, let me ask you this. Aunt Jessica, or what about you? What's your name? What are your passions and careers that you guys like to do for fun?
Well, we love artwork. We like to go to art shows. And we like to travel.
What kind of art shows do you guys like?
We go to a lot of craft shows.
Oh, wow. It's a really great pleasure to meet you. What a blessing. I really love your outfit, too. I love the color pink. It's my second favorite color.
Thank you. You're very interesting.
Thank you. It's a pleasure meeting you, too.
I mean, boy, you really love those garnishes.
Down the hatcheroni it goes.
Yep.
Mmm. I tasted it. It was so yummy in the tummy.
Didn't you have enough to eat, sweetheart? Right?
I'm fine.
Everybody's okay.
I'm perfectly fine.
You really did a great job.
Thank you so much for having us here. My name is Heidi Landis. I'm a drama therapist, and I'm thrilled to be able to moderate this panel today. With us today, we have Samantha Elisoffen, who is the actress in the movie, Rachel Israel, who is the director, and Aubrey Therian, who is the executive artistic director of Epic Players. I know we're short on time, so I'm just going to get right into it. Samantha, can you tell us a little bit about what you enjoyed most about making this film?
I really loved about most of all is I just really loved getting this wonderful and unique opportunity to make my voice heard as an autism ambassador, performer, spokesperson, and also as a singer and actress, and getting to really show that to the world.
Yeah. And what did you find the most challenging piece of doing this film?
Well, a lot of things were really not that easy peasy than you think. Not having to rely on the script and not saying everything, putting myself in the other character's shoes, in Sarah's shoes, and being able to improvise and trying to relax. And because sometimes my eyes tend to be very stiff and I don't really go with the flow. And my character has a lot of anxiety, which I can relate to in real life. It was really hard to have to wait long, tiring, and tedious hours on set, and just having to sit and Rachel not wanting me to rely on the script so much or constant rote memorization. So just having to be natural was just another major challenge that I had to go through, and trying to just relax and just sit still.
So, Samantha, did you improvise most of the script?
Most of it was improvised, except for, the sex scene and everything, except for that. Everything was just said in my own words, like scripted phrases like sharing is caring. I just made it up on the spot. It just came from me very naturally and spontaneously.
Thank you. Rachel, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the film came about.
Yeah, sure. Is it on? Mm-hmm. Hello. Okay. So the film was initially inspired by my relationship with Brandon Polanski, who plays the other Samantha's romantic interest, David, in the film. I've known Brandon now for going on 17 years, and for all the years that I've known him, he's been searching for love. He's been searching for a girlfriend. I guess it's about 8 years ago that he met a really meaningful relationship at the JCC's Center for Special Needs. And I got much more involved in his life during that relationship as a friend, and then inspired as a filmmaker by this love story that I saw unfolding that had a very powerful, positive impact in his life, but also raised some interesting dramas. And then I was at the time an MFA student at Columbia, and I decided to make a short film on the subject. And in casting, I discovered Samantha, who totally changed everything. And the story became less about Brandon's autobiography and more about how these two people would fall in love. And so we then kind of adapted that story to be about, to involve Samantha in the casting. We made a short film and then immediately went on to make this feature, in which there's also supporting roles played by people on the autism spectrum, all drawn from the same community, whom I worked with over the course of the next 2 years to develop the story. So even though Samantha's dialogue was largely improvised based on the structure of the dialogue in a script. So the story is all written. There were 100 drafts of the script, literally. And also every actor worked differently according to their what was best for their performance. So Samantha has a gift for improvisation, and that really worked well for her dialogue. Other actors worked better sticking more to scripted lines.
So you just mentioned that the original idea for the script was based off of Brandon's love life. Yeah. So when the script was finished, or this movie, how much of it is based in reality and how much is fictionalized?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. So working with the cast, we developed fictionalized versions of who they are. So we took things from their personal experiences that would bring emotion to their performances, but it was also very important that we're not making a documentary, we're making a piece of fiction. And for me, that was important as an artist because, I'm a fiction filmmaker. I love the intensely empathetic experience that you have as an audience in a fiction film. And I felt like it was very important for there to be films made where everyone can empathize with characters on the autism spectrum, because there's not a lot. And then also for the actors, they're working as actors, they're not exposing themselves to the extent that they would if this were a documentary.
And I ask that question because as a drama therapist, we're often working with this idea of how close and how far we are to the actual narrative in order to experience things, to make art. And so Samantha, it makes me wonder or want to ask you, your character of Sarah, what is one way that Sarah is similar to you and one way that she's not like you at all?
Well, one way that is similar that she's tends to be oftentimes when she doesn't understand something, she needs clarification. Just like me, we can both be quite literal sometimes, especially. That's really similar, and we're both really have a tremendous amount of energy, live energy, very exuberant, very optimistic and upbeat, and I can totally relate to that. Yeah. From my character in Samantha Lasafin in real life. Yeah. And the completely differences. I don't. Well, I get what it means, what a condo means, and condominium. My character Sarah says she's very open to speaking about sexual humor, and I'm not, because it's way too much information, and I'm not. I'm not strictly severe to gluten in real life, but the character is.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Aubrey, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about Epic Players and your connection to Keep the Change.
Sure, yeah. So the Epic Players, which stands for Empower, Perform, Include, and Create, is a neurodiverse theater company here in New York City that fights for representation for our actors on stage and screen and providing them those opportunities to represent themselves. So we're connected with Keep the Change because several of our actors are in the film. And it was so inspiring for them and our company to go see the film together and see themselves represented there. They left feeling like they could do that, like they could write their own films. They wanted to be like Rachel. They wanted to be like Samantha. And it's something they're absolutely capable of. And I think, if anything, Keep the Change proves that actors and actresses living with autism can and should represent themselves on stage and screen. And I hope and look forward to seeing more of them there.
I guess a quick question for all of you. I know that there's been a lot of press around this movie, and that inspires each of you to sort of think about what's next. So what's next for you, Samantha?
Well, my greatest hope and dream as fantasy is to not only continue making my voice well heard and appreciated as a performer, as a singer, as a spokesperson, as an ambassador, but my greatest hope and my dream is for Rachel to hopefully make this, push it up and not move it on to the next level so I can be seen on television. I can be seen, and my voices can be heard on an actual television series.
So Rachel, are you going to push it up a notch?
Yeah, we're working on that. We're developing Keep the Change into a TV series. There's such a diversity of characters in this world that it's a perfect medium. So we're really excited about that.
And what about you, Aubrey?
Yeah, and I think another way in which Epic and Keep the Change are connected is that we're there to do that too, to make sure this isn't a one-hit wonder, that this continues happening. You know, Samantha, a lot of the reviews of the movie, which were incredibly powerful and positive, Samantha was billed as an unprofessional actress doing the movie, or non-professional actor, and you would never say that about a neurotypical actress making her movie debut. Samantha's starred in Keep the Change, in Good Time with Robert Pattinson, in a recent commercial, and is the lead in many main stage plays in off-Broadway and off-Broadway in New York City.
Thank you.
And she is a professional actress.
Thank you.
We paid all our actors, so they're all professional.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Yes. So I guess in conclusion, I'm going to give you the last word, Samantha. So I'm going to start here. Okay. Is knowing what this panel is about today, knowing what this whole day has been about today. What is the one message or piece of advice that you would want people who are listening today to hear?
Yeah. Well, this is not exclusive to women, but I would want people to know that casting authentically is not an act of charity, that it makes better art.
Yeah. Aubrey, how about you? What's the one last piece of Advice or wisdom that you would like those listening today to hear?
Stop telling our girls and women with autism that they can't. They absolutely can.
Yes. And Samantha, you get the last word. What is the one most important thing you would like people to know today?
I didn't hear rephrase the question because I don't understand it.
Absolutely. If you had one important message that you would want everybody to know today, what would you want them to know?
I still don't get it. I'm having a very hard time with the
Yeah,
question.
no, you're doing a great job. Advice or the thing you learned, the thing you learned the most from doing this project?
Oh, okay. I learned that it was not an easy peasy task to being on film and rote memorization. I want to really keep the world posted. Everyone who's seen this film so many times and never gets conscious or tired of watching me on the big screen or watching everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I think the really important lesson learned is that, especially women with autism like me, is to, exactly what Aubrey said. In addition to saying you can't do this, oh, I suck, I sound horrible, I would definitely encourage everybody listening to this to just put themselves out there, just strive to do better. You know, there's no such thing as perfect. No one's perfect. You know, practice does make perfect, but just tell yourselves that the more you put yourself out there in the community to do, the more you'll excel greater and better things. I had to learn how to wake up early. It's not fun. It's not easy peasy to wake up and be an early bird doing a lot of schlepping. It's very stressful, but my word goes out to anybody who is not an early bird like me and is not used to adapting quickly and to transitions, is just to relax and take a chill pill, go with the flow, and just persevere and just keep on striving and just do whatever you set your mind to doing and find loving relationships and find other people when I want to be loved. And same thing goes to everybody else, guys who are single. And I'm also looking for sexy and hunky guys. Just find relationships and different, social, sexual, romantic. But don't give up.
Perfect. Don't give up. That is the best way to end it, and I can't wait to see what happens next for everybody up here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samantha. I need to let you know I'm a fan, and I really hope to see more of you on my screen and TV. Thank you. So I invite you to take your seats again, and we have our final panel. I'm just going to go back to the first film, Please Stand By, where in that film we saw the character look at a job and that economic security as a pathway to freedom for herself. And so this final panel is just obviously very, very important. So I'd like to invite the panelists to join us for the 4 E's: education, employment, and economic empowerment. Our moderator will be Tara Cunningham, who is the CEO of Specialistern, and we're looking forward to the conversation. We welcome all the panelists to join Tara on the podium. Fantastic.
I want to specifically thank the UN on this World Autism Awareness Day for bringing women to the forefront. And so a big, 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 big. And thank you to, I have 3 amazing people that are going to go through the 4 E's: education, employment, and economic empowerment. And with education, we've heard many things today about the lack of awareness, the lack of identification of autistic women. And one of these women is right here, who is about to start her career in real life, but is right now a sophomore at Mercyhurst University, Rachel Wilson. So Rachel, can you tell us why you chose Mercyhurst University?
Well, I'm from the Erie area, so it's close. So originally I was very much like, no, I need to get out of home because, everyone wants to spread their wings when they leave or when they go to school. So I was very much like, no, not going to Mercyhurst. But one day I was like, okay, I feel like I don't want to go to class because senioritis is very real. And so I went and took a tour, and as soon as I got off the bus, I was like, I think this is where I'm going to spend the next 4 years. So not only just loving being on campus, I was very lucky in having a mom who's a social worker, so she gets the ins and outs of all of these things. So she knew about the program on campus, and we worked very hard to make sure that I was able to be in the program and succeed.
Very good. And when you decided to go to Mercyhurst, did you decide to self-identify as an autistic woman?
Well, when I was in high school, like a few people have said, like we're kind of seen as not necessarily, well, I guess weird, I guess is the word that a lot of people have been using. A lot of my friends who were on the spectrum and who were comfortable with being like out on the spectrum were kind of seen as the weird kids. So I wanted to really fit in more in high school because, you know, everyone wants to fit in high school. And one of the main things that the program has done for me has been able to accept, not necessarily accept my diagnosis, but be more comfortable with my diagnosis. So I feel more comfortable being at school as an autistic woman now.
Very good. And you decided to go in a program called AIM at Mercyhurst. Can you tell us what kind of supports they have there?
Well, AIM stands for the Autism Initiative at Mercyhurst, and it's a group of 60 students like myself on the spectrum, and it's a lot of different academic support, social support, independence support, and emotional support. So we meet with our advisor every week to keep us on track with what we're doing, to see how everything's going. We have study halls, so we have all time to get our work done, so we have allotted time that we don't have any distractions. We have different group outings and activities that the RAs set up, and we have specific housing on campus for people who are in the program.
So when you were on the housing for, you did that your freshman year, but you're also in the bands and you also have loads of friends. And so where are you living this year?
Well, I live off, or still kind of on campus, but I live in housing with my friends who were not on the spectrum. So it's a little difficult because they don't understand why I'll spend 15 minutes running around our apartment looking for one specific pen or certain things like that. But they're starting to understand that I am not as different as, you know, people on the spectrum are seen to be. And it's really nice that I have that support, not only with the AIM program, but with other people in my life as well.
That's incredible. And the burning question is, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Well, I would like to work in a museum as an archive librarian, so that's the big goal. I have 3 museums that I really want to work at. I want to work at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland. I'm a really big music person. I really love the American Museum of Natural History here in New York City, and I really love the archives in DC.
Okay, so if any of those 3 museums are looking for an incredible young woman, look no further than Rachel Wilson. Congratulations to Rachel. Thank you so much for sharing your story. So now on the next stage of this story is a woman named Tara Curry, who I've been able to meet through working with Specialist Erna. She was one of about 40 people who applied for a job at a major New York financial firm, and she made it to a position that is quite extraordinary. But the incredible thing about Tara is she didn't think she met the needs for this role, which is a typical thing we find here at Specialist Erna, where we're all women here, right? Or those of us who are women. We have a big problem where we only apply for jobs when we can meet 100% of the requirements. The same is true for autistic men. However, women with autism need to far exceed what that job description is. And despite begging, we begged, the company begged, and the community agency begged Tara to come on board. She only had 3 economics courses. And so she...
I just took Intro to Macro, Intro to Micro, Intro to Investment in college.
And only. And she did so well that this agency just hired her, and she started working this week. So let's have a big clap. Tara's story is really unique. So can you tell us about your college years?
Okay, so I went to Connecticut College, which is a small liberal arts college in New London, Connecticut. And they did have an office for disability services, but I didn't want to be labeled, so I never registered. I felt like I was labeled, especially as a child, so I just decided not to self-identify. But now I regret it, because I feel like if my teachers and my choir directors and the library staff had known that I was dealing with these issues, they would have been able to understand me and communicate with me better. So if you're about to start college or a new career and you don't want to self-identify, it's probably a good idea to disclose so that everyone can understand you and you can communicate with your peers.
That is excellent. Thank you for that piece of advice. Yes, I see a lot of flapping. So going forward, there were concerns that you wouldn't be able to live independently. But when you went for your master's at NYU, you went to an extraordinary place.
Yes, I actually had a summer abroad in Paris to complete my master's in French studies. So I've been pursuing French since middle school, and I've always been interested in languages since childhood, so I had this great experience of being able to study French culture and sociology in Paris, and I never thought that I would be able to do that. It was my first time flying on a plane by myself, and my first time in a real study abroad program, so I never would have been able to do this just a few years ago without the right support from my family, from the school, and from the rest of my support network.
So today, you are on your third day at your new job. So how do you feel you're doing over there?
It's my fourth day, actually.
Sorry. Oh, excuse me.
So, yes.
And you're already Skyping off at the UN.
So, yes, what I'm doing is proofreading documents to make sure that the language is correct and easy to read. So the department screens documents to be exchanged between two corporations. So I go over that, and I also do some research about our competition because my last two jobs included a lot of research-based work.
So excellent. So congratulations, Tara. Thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.
And our final person, and please forgive me, I'm going to do my best, Johanna Grochowska. Oh, okay. we knew that wasn't going to work well. Johanna came from Poland to be here with us today. This is her first trip in New York, and she has a very very long resume, which includes bringing people and supports for people with autism into the workplace. So Johanna is going to share with us some accommodations that can be made, easy accommodations.
Okay, but I think that I would like to start with a little experiment, and I hope that you are ready for it. So I'm going to challenge you today, and here is your challenge. Please look around and find the seat that is in the very center of this auditorium. Okay, I repeat it. Find the seat that is in the very center of this auditorium. Yeah, and now point to it, please, with your finger. Oh, yeah? Thank you, more or less. Okay, and now the second part of the challenge. Please find the seat with a beautiful woman with a red scarf on this auditorium. Yeah. So, as you know, women with ASD get lost very often in near clear instructing. Of course, this is a very simple explaining of the issue. However, when you think about women with autism, remember how you struggled with my first instruction, which is not be very precise. And remember that for women with ASD, the struggle is infinitely more difficult. And I would like to say that we could make many things to make the environment at work much more friendly for them. Sometimes it could be enough to show some goodwill and let them wear a hat or a cap with a brim or sunglasses or headphones and give them clear instructions to help them become much more reliable, productive, and really excellent employees.
Excellent. So I'm going to do another experiment. So who in this audience would be willing to let somebody wear headphones or a hat with a brim or sunglasses? Show of hands. So everybody in this room is well able to accommodate people with autism. Shock, horror here at the UN. Thank you to everyone for your wonderful sharing of stories, the brilliant advice that we've gotten up here. I think we have two women that are going to be doing some amazing things. And I'd like to again thank the UN for highlighting this very important topic.
All right, so join me again in just thanking this final group of panelists. Thank you very much. And to Tara for your moderation. So this comes to the end of our day. You know, we do this once a year, World Autism Awareness Day. This year we did it a couple days late because the actual day came right after a holiday weekend, so we decided that we wanted to give people a chance to travel. Next year it will happen on the day though, so mark your calendars. And we hope for another very special day. Before we say goodbye, we have to thank our truly, truly, truly courageous, knowledgeable, amazing panelists, all of them from today. So thank you to all of our panelists. It was just amazing. And we'd also like to thank, from the Department of Public Information, our co-sponsor, the Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and finally, of course, the support of the member states here today. That's Argentina, Bangladesh, Bulgaria, Denmark, Israel, Italy, Kazakhstan, and Poland. And before you walk out, I just want to let you know that there is an exhibition for World Autism Awareness Day in the visitors lobby. It's beginning at 1 o'clock, so it's beginning now through 6 p.m. On your way out, please be sure to take a look, and that is sponsored by the missions of Bangladesh and Qatar. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. May I please get your contact information?